Now, folks, today I'm going to be introducing our first speaker. He is the senior staff instructor at LinkedIn Learning and lynda.com. He has published over 60 courses on WordPress and other web technologies. Also, they say that you shouldn't meet your heroes, but in this case, I say that is definitely not true. It is a great personal honor to introduce Morten Rand-Andersen.
So, Norwegians blush a lot. It's a genetic thing. Let's see if I can get this computer to fit here. They say you should always prepare your slides on stage while you're waiting for things to start, right? Good. Normally I have a head mic, so I don't do this while I'm talking. That is not happening today, apparently, so yes, you've been warned. In 2015, WordPress made a decision on behalf of the web. It was a significant one, although at the time it didn't really look like it. It was the inclusion of responsive images into WordPress core. The reason why it was significant was because in 2015, the jury was still out on responsive images. There was a spec, there were a huge group of people working on that spec, and some of those people said, if we're going to win this battle over what the spec should look like, we should just ship our code to as many people as possible, and then the web will just follow. And some of those people looked to WordPress and said, there's already work being done there, so we're just going to come into the project and help out. Package it up, put it into WordPress core, and ship it to like 20-something% of the web. And then hopefully that will be enough. This is a slide from Joe McGill's talk about this from 2015. Unfortunately, this stat no longer exists. It's a weird thing on the web. It's like all these companies make stats about how the web works, but then they change their algorithms all the time. So you'll be like, whoa, look at this graph. It looks crazy. And then 6 months later, you look at the same graph and it looks completely different. And then the explanation is in the annotation going like, we changed the mathematical formula to calculate this and we omitted the following data. So we're just going to choose to believe Joe's Joe's screenshot, because that's how the web works now. Anything that's a screenshot is real and happened. But this is actually real. Until WordPress, was it 4.4 shipped, responsive images was not something that was prevalent on the web. When WordPress 4.4 shipped, responsive images was suddenly a thing that was happening on the web in a very specific way. To the point where Joe's told me that now when you go and look at tutorials on how to do responsive images, you'll find little snippets of code that actually originate from WordPress. We have not been the best custodians of our decision, though. On Thursday this week, WordPress shipped code that doesn't comply with responsive images anymore to every WordPress user in the world. And this wasn't something that we didn't know. This was flagged in April 2017. And it kind of tells us something about how we make decisions in this community. We all want to do great things. We are in this room, we are in this community, we build WordPress together, specifically because we want to make the web a place everyone can be at. But because of how WordPress came about, because of how open source works, because of everything else, the way we make decisions on individual items is often strange. And when you dive deep into it and invest time in it, you can often get rather confused about what is happening and how it's happening. And it's funny because if you've been following me on Twitter, it's like 90% garbage, but occasionally I'll say something that I think is meaningful, and then other people will be like, hey, yeah, I disagree with you, and I'm going to have a conversation with you on this forum, because that makes sense. So I had this huge thing going where I was saying, hey, we really need to fix this problem, and it's this really technical, small little problem that no one can see, but it's a problem that we need to fix because we are custodians of a decision that we made on behalf of the web. And in the middle of that conversation, this guy called Matt. Are you here? Is he? He's watching somewhere else. I'm sorry, that's not a joke. I appreciate it. He'll probably hear about this at some point. But, it's public, so it's on the internet. So Matt came in and said, not sure if responsive images should have ever come into core. I think I agree with Matt, but I don't think I agree with the reason. You see, responsive images, when it was included in core, the decision was made because it was a new, cool technology, and it was something that looked like we needed. Unfortunately, the spec was really not ready for the future. So what worked in 2015 doesn't work properly anymore. But we shipped it, and it became a standard because of it. I want to talk to you about how we can use WordPress to move the web forward. So we keep talking about this number, right? The ever-increasing, incremental, probably wrong because the stat probably updated this morning, number of like 26%, 25%, no, 27%, 32%, 32.5%. That was Thursday. So I guess it's probably 32.56 or something like that today. This is the footprint that the software we create has on the web. Well, to be frank, it's like, what is it, the top 10 million sites on, according to Alexa or something like that, but it's a significant footprint on the web. And we keep talking about where are we going to go next? Well, the goal is 50% apparently. The goal is to really make the web powered by WordPress in some fashion. Last year, Matt Mullenweg said, what got us here won't get us to 50%. That's true. But it's true in a bigger sense than just, code and how we do things. It's actually true in the way we manage our community. What got us to this point was deep devotion to open source software and a community that piles together to solve huge problems in a very interesting way that works really well, and a lot of luck. What gets us to the next hurdle will be how we manage ourselves. You see, the web evolves by paving the cowpaths. Some of you may have seen this picture before. It's a story I tell a lot because I think it's funny. This is our head office at LinkedIn Learning. They built a new building because we were expanding, and the designer of the head office had this grand idea that there's a building and then there's the new office directly in front of it. And they built this huge oval of grass in front of the main entrance and then had a path that went around it. And it looks really nice. And they opened the building the day I was there. And I walked through and I'm like, this is stupid, so I'm just going to walk right over the grass. And it was this high, really tall grass. So when you walked over it, you kind of pounded it down. So I started walking over it, and then other people walked over it, and eventually it became a bit of an issue. So they paved it. This is how the web works. Someone proposes a spec or some sort of new technology, a bunch of people use it, then a bunch more people see that they use it, so they use it too, and eventually the browser manufacturers say, this is a cowpath that's been paved, that people have been using, so we're going to pave that cowpath. The idea is, instead of coming up with a new and better spec, they look at the current behavior of the people who are creating things on the web, and then they say, we're going to formalize this behavior into a standard, and we're going to make it so that that's how it works. With 32% of the web, we are actually the cowpath now. Whatever decision we make for WordPress is a decision we make on behalf of the web. So how do we make these decisions? And how do we know that those decisions are the right decisions for the web, not just WordPress? What principles do we stand for and refer to anytime we say, this is something not only WordPress, but the web should do? Well, we have a principle. In our About page, it says, we believe in democratizing publishing and the freedom that comes with open source. The spelling error is likely me, not the About page, by the way. What does that mean? Democratize publishing. It sounds great, but what does it actually mean? I like to break down words and figure out what they actually mean. So democratize means introduce a democratic system or governance principles or democratic principles, or make something accessible to everyone. So that last one seems really reasonable, right? And publishing means make content available online, or in paper or whatever, but online. So if we take those two pieces together, we get this really awkward sentence. Democratize publishing means making content available online accessible to everyone. This is what we believe. This is our principle, and it has been since day one. This is democratizing publishing on the web. Now, if we take a step back and look at the larger web and what the larger web's principles are, we find the Web Foundation, founded by Tim Berners-Lee, the inventor of the World Wide Web. And the Web Foundation says, we envision a world where all people are empowered by the web. Everyone, regardless of language, ability, location, gender, age, or income, will be able to communicate and collaborate, create valued content, and access the information that they need to improve their lives and communities. And you read it and you go, that sounds like WordPress. And it truly does. Because if you take that and then you combine it with our values that say WordPress is software designed for everyone, emphasizing accessibility, performance, security, and ease of use. And we believe great software should work with minimum setup, and you can focus on sharing your story, product, or services freely. What you realize is WordPress, in a really real sense, can be the realization of the promise of the web. The promise of the web is that everyone should have equal access to content and content publishing, to be able to share their thoughts, ideas, and creations with the world, and talk to anyone else about those thoughts, ideas, and creations. And WordPress makes that possible. It costs nothing, it runs almost everywhere, and it just works. What's missing from us is maybe the most crucial part for the web, which is participation and representation in the fora that make decisions about the space we work in. Who speaks for WordPress? When politicians make decisions about the internet, they introduce privacy laws, they introduce encryption laws, they ban encryption or add more encryption, they ban privacy or add more privacy. Who speaks for WordPress in those fora? The answer is corporations with financial interest in specific outcomes. The answer is corporations with specific interests that are an antithesis to what we want. The answer is everyone else speaks on behalf of us, and we say nothing. Who speaks for the people who use WordPress? No one. We power 32.5% of the web, and when a decision is made and people want to know what WordPress stands for, there's no answer. We have made a conscious decision to not take part in any decision that impacts every user of our software. And many of those decisions are now coming into our software and saying, hey, you didn't take part in this decision, but you now have to change your software to fit with our demands. We are at the point where we need to claim our seat at every table where a decision is made. Because we have an obligation to actually represent the people affected by WordPress. And the people affected by WordPress is not just the 99% who are not here today. It is actually every user of the web. Because when we make decisions on WordPress, we are making decisions on behalf of the web. But to do that, we must first know what we stand for. Like I said, democratized publishing. That's what we stand for, right? But what are the necessary conditions for us to be able to democratize publishing? That's a question we need to answer. Because when we go in and we talk to all the people that make decisions, we need to figure out what is it we want to ask them. Where are the principles that we are going to stand on when we argue with them over how they govern the web, how they govern the internet, how they govern communication that goes through optical cables under oceans and into the sky and up in space? We need to know what those principles are. I have a proposal on how to get started. So if you think about the web and think about our role on the web, what you see is there are three governing principles that are essential for WordPress and its users. The first one is accessibility. Now, accessibility is the promise of the web. The entire reason the web exists is for anyone to plug into a phone line or a network line and be able to access content that other people have published in the way that they want and in the way that works for them. The grand idea of the web was simply to take all the documents that were sitting in books and folders at CERN and make them available to people at the other side of the planet in a way that they could access it and contribute back to it. That is the extension that we've created. We've made that possible to everyone. Accessibility is the core promise of the web. Privacy is the capability we must grant our users. Now, WordPress meets one of the great promises of the web, which is anyone can publish content. And we take great strides to protect the publisher. We also have to give the publisher the capability of protecting their users. The privacy of the end user of the web is our responsibility. And finally, open governance for the web, for the internet. We need to take part in the conversations about how the web is run, how the web works, and we need to take part in the conversations about how the internet runs, how it works, and how information flows across all nations on the entire globe and in the universe. Because there's like a spaceship up there with people on it, and they have internet. And I guarantee one of them has a WordPress site. I'm going to do something I'm not supposed to. I don't want to talk to you about accessibility and privacy and open governance. I want the people who do this work to talk to you about accessibility and privacy and governance. So, Rachel, can you come up and talk about accessibility for me?
Excuse me. Good morning. So some of you know me as the director of WP Campus. Some of you know me as the woman who says Roll Tide a lot on the internet. Roll Tide. And hopefully most of you know me as someone who cares a lot and talks a lot about accessibility. And Morton's right, this microphone is awkward. So I'm going to lean here and have a little moment. So I wanted to stand up here and talk to you for just a few minutes about this topic and have a little bit of a heart-to-heart. Like, we're going to just talk one-on-one, okay? Because accessibility has been a little bit of a hot word in our community lately, and people are very passionate all around, and for good reasons. So I think if we chat a little bit about why that is and how we can move forward, I think that would be super great. So accessibility is something that, for a lot of us who build the web, can be quite frustrating. And I get it. It's tough for someone to come along and say, I can't use your website, and it's your fault. That's hard, right? But there's not one person in this room that can stand up on this stage and say that I have built 100% accessible websites that every single person on the web can use. And the more that we can come to terms with that and kind of let go of that ego, I promise the easier it is. Because it's not about us, right? It's about the user. It's not about, how we feel about it. It's about growing and making the web better and making the web more usable and making the web usable for those 20+% of people that depend on assistive technologies to even consume information. For those like myself who are able-bodied and can use a mouse and have vision and can hear, navigating the web is really easy. You do not think about, these problems that come along. It is super easy for us. We have a level of privilege that we can forget about. But for those who maybe can't use a mouse and can't see and can't hear, it's a very different and very real experience and a very real challenge. And so a lot of accessibility discussions can be frustrating, especially I'm an engineer, and you have someone come along, and I'm going to be real for a second. A lot of accessibility problems are due to invalid HTML. Like we're building the web wrong. And I'm not saying it's anybody's fault. We all learned from Googling Stack Overflow and copying and pasting tutorials, and that's how we got here, And so we've all done it. But that's what it comes down to. A lot of times we're not using semantic HTML. We're using span tags instead of buttons to, throw things up. JavaScript came along and gave us this huge opportunity to manipulate the DOM in very dynamic ways. But if you don't truly understand HTML, then you're more likely to basically mess up the DOM. You're kind of moving HTML around a lot. You're confusing the browser. And I get it. It's fun. JavaScript is fun. And a lot of times, myself included, you're working on something and your website works, and you're maybe not necessarily thinking if it's working correctly. And so I think for a lot of us in our community moving forward, what we need a lot in our community is some kind of enforcement and some kind of scanning and things like this. The more we can implement tools, there are a lot of tools available. I hope you'll join me tomorrow at the Contributor Day. We're going to work on ways to enforce scanning in core, which will be really great. And I know that when something comes along, some code you wrote gets scanned and returns a violation. That's hard to see. But I promise it's going to make you better as a developer because you're learning, and it's going to make the experience better for the users. But I think that we should take it a step further because, core is only part of the fun. We're all writing themes and we're all writing plugins that everyone uses, and that's a huge percentage of how people interact with WordPress. So we do have a personal responsibility to come along and use these same tools to understand HTML and use it correctly. To understand ARIA, I'd recommend watching Rhiann's talk from yesterday, which is a great HTML spec. So we have a responsibility there to come along and understand these things, to scan our own things. I would love to see a world in WordPress going forward where themes and plugins aren't allowed in the repo unless they meet a certain level of accessibility. That's what I propose here today, that we start to work on, because we do have a responsibility. We do have this repo that everyone's coming along and downloading all this code, but we're not coming along behind ourselves and making sure that what we're putting out there not only works, but is accessible. And that's something that we should take on. So I do think these are things that we can do. They may seem like a little bit of a challenge here at the front, but we can do this if we work together. And we can take on this project and responsibility, and we can, as a whole, impact 32.5% of the web, and that's really great and amazing. So I hope that you'll work with me. I hope y'all would come and join tomorrow. And thank you for this opportunity, Morton. We're passing it along. Oh, I'm not the last in this scenario, by the way. And so I would love to bring up Leo to come and talk about privacy.
Hi, 'Cause I don't know.
Hey everyone. Not like 15, 16 hours ago, I was on the stage talking about privacy. So some of you might have seen me talk just a little while ago about the exact same topic. Privacy is a big deal. Like, I don't know here how many people have done work surrounding GDPR, surrounding span cam, around all the laws and stuff. And people usually say, man, it really sucks having to follow the law. It's like, yeah, but the laws exist because we need to care about people. So at a really basic level, I think people take issues surrounding privacy and say, we want to understand how to make money, or we want to understand how to make our businesses sustainable. We want to understand what's critical at the end of the day to get us from where we are to where we want to go. And I think first about publishing at a core idea. So I went to journalism school. I had this dream when I was in high school. I was going to be like at the New York Times, writing in this newspaper, or maybe at this big magazine. And I did a lot of that stuff. I did journalism, and I saw that whole thing happen. I remember Craigslist. You guys all know Craigslist. We all saw the death of the newspaper, and we're watching it as we speak. Newspapers won't exist 5, 10 years from now, or if they do, there'll be a hollowed-out shell of themselves. And it's a weird thing. So what replaces that model instead? It's things like analytics. It's things like advertising. These are the core things that make the internet possible. They actually make it so that these businesses are sustainable. There are also things like paywalls, right? Paywalls are really interesting. They make it so that people are saying this content is worth paying for. At the end of the day, when we start to build in these whole things, we start to think about then better content and better structures around it. We have SEO as a whole business. There are a lot of really critical people in this space who are like, yeah, we have the very best content. We also have a little bit of code that runs here that personalizes the ads, and that suddenly this data here is going to be really good. Well, the challenge is there are a lot of frameworks surrounding all this stuff that say it should be a certain way. Most of us in this room are not familiar with those frameworks. Most of us have not decided what those frameworks should be. At a really basic level, we have just accepted for a very, very long time that the way the internet looks is going to be essentially something that we just have to comply with. In practice, people have broken those rules. So I'm sure you guys all know about what happened, guys, girls, and non-gendered peoples all know what happened last year, 2 years ago. 2016, there was a major discussion around data that was used as part of Facebook's data collection, as part of Cambridge Analytica, and all this stuff. I'm not going to rant about Facebook. If you want to see that, go look on YouTube or on WordPress.tv where I talk about that. But that data, including my data, was used to manipulate elections all across the world. Data that I did not give up, that was probably using psychographic profiling, which is part of marketing. It's been around for the last 50, 60 years. This is not a secret. People use data in ways to do whatever they want. In practice, we need to do 2 or 3 things as a community. We need to understand what data means. We need to understand how to use this data. We need to understand what the scope of that data means. And we should be asking questions about basic anonymization. I get into some of the more technical nuances. Chances are 60, 70% of the things we already do as a community are getting us in the right directions towards security and privacy. I'm happy about that. We fundamentally in America do not understand the overlap between free speech and good user privacy. If I go to the library, no one's going to ask me what books I'm reading. If I go read an article online, I should not have the same level of introspection. People don't necessarily need to know that I really want to read a book about how to sew, right? Maybe I just want to learn how to sew. Maybe I have a button that fell off my shirt. It doesn't suddenly mean that I'm now interested in sewing classes, right? This is a key critical concept that's been built into our infrastructure. Privacy is not necessarily something that's been coupled into the guarantee of information as accessibility. And I've been really excited because as I see this space slowly shift, we now have laws that say you have to do this. The laws aren't the fun part. It's the privacy by design is the discussion. And there's nothing more exciting than to finally have an opportunity to be able to discuss this as a community. And I really hope that all of you have, if you have any thoughts around this, we have lots of docs that need to get written. We have lots of code that needs to get written. We have unit tests that need to get fixed. We have components that half work, but that shipped anyway because that's how these things work. And we need your help to be able to move the nudge this little ball forward. And as these laws change, we need your help to continuously help us understand where we've come from and where we want to go. Oh, next we have someone else too. Oh, Chris Teisel. Hey, Chris.
All right, so I get the fun topic of governance. And like Leo said, laws aren't fun. Nobody likes to follow them, right? And we get a lot of laws given to us, GDPR. We all had a lot of fun updating our websites. Now we all have to accept cookies, and we get to have full screen pop-ups and everything come at us every time we visit a website. And I was inspired at a State of the Word a couple years back, listening to Morton talk about where is our representation to the people who are making the decisions and the laws about us. And there wasn't a real clear answer to that. It was get involved. And I'll admit, I'm coming from a community that isn't WordPress. My history is in Drupal. Yes, I'm one of those people. And I'm here, and I'm converting, and I'm learning the ways. And I know that for a while I won't be able to use this "I'm a newcomer" tag, but I do for now. And so coming from Drupal and coming over, I was sitting there watching that, and I was thinking about it. And Heather Burns, who's not here with us today, but hi Heather on the live stream. I contacted her at WordCamp Europe this year, and I said, hey, I work a lot in Drupal. I would love to work with you to figure out how we can together make privacy better for both of our projects. Then I got sucked into this whirlwind of let's expand that, and let's make that something bigger than just privacy. And so we're working on it. We're getting other groups, other CMSs involved. And what we're trying to do is build an open web governance that will allow us as a group, not WordPress, but as a group dictate to those that are governing us, here's what we stand for, and allow us to set those regulations ourselves. Because the problem is that right now we're reactionary. We react to a new law that comes out. CCPA comes out from California, and now we're all reacting to that. There's going to be privacy laws, there's going to be a GDPR clone for the US, and we're going to have to react to that. But can we get actionary? Can we become the ones that get out there and say, this is what we're already doing, we're creating the cow path? And my theory is that the lawmakers will follow. They're writing the rules that they are because they're not informed by the people who are writing the code. And so we need to be the ones informing them and giving them the insight to allow them to make laws that we can comply with and that we don't want to subvert at every corner that we take. And so that's my challenge. And so I'm coming here from outside the community, from inside the community now for a year or two, saying, join us, join me, and let's figure out a way that we can provide a larger governance to the web, and then voice that to the bodies that are regulating us so that we don't have to be reactionary anymore. So with that, I'll bring Morton back up.
2 days ago, WordPress made a very big decision on behalf of the web about how publishing should be done in the future. It is a bold decision that will be followed by every single person who publishes anything on the web. If you go outside the WordPress bubble right now onto the internet, you can see people go, what is this thing? And then you get the response, wait a second, we already did this 8 years ago in our CMS that is internal to our company and has a proprietary license of $10,000 a month. And you have a bunch of other people who say, this is the thing that I always wanted, I just didn't know it. And then you have a bunch of people who are saying, what does this future look like? I can't answer that. I stood up on stage here last year and I talked about my crazy vision of VR WordPress. And some people have started working on it. Hopefully tonight or in a couple hours, our good friend Matt will tell us his vision of what the future looks like, not just for WordPress, but for the web. That includes thinking broader. If you ask me, this is the last time we should be making decisions for WordPress. From now on, every decision we make should be a decision we make not just for us, but for the web as a whole. What we discovered with responsive images was Gutenberg drew a line and said, this is the actual end of what responsive images can do. We found the edge. It is so close to the edge that it's hard to solve. The spec simply doesn't meet the requirements of the modern web. It was built for a time that doesn't exist anymore. When we go into a media project next year and say we're going to rethink media, we have to rethink media for the web. That means stepping outside the WordPress community and going to the W3C and going to the RICG and going to the CSS working group and to all the people who actually build the web and say, hey, we're 32% of the web. We want a seat at the table, not because we want to dictate how things are going to be, but because we want to work together to build a solution that works for everyone so we can democratize publishing. And we can ship that solution to the web so we don't have to wait 5 years for it to take effect. We can make a decision, bake it into core, ship it, and with the turn of a switch, we change the web into what we want. Because we are 32% of the web. But to get there, we first need to understand where we want to go. That is our biggest challenge. The most difficult thing in life is to know yourself. It is also the most important challenge you have to undertake. What got us here won't get us there. Welcome to the first meeting of the WordPress Governance Project. The floor is open.
If anybody has any questions, please come up to the microphones on either side of the room right here. Or if you have accessibility issues, I can bring the mic to you.
This is made for a taller person. Okay. Hey, Morton. So this seems like a great initiative. I've heard a few people murmuring about it in the last few days. How do we ensure that the current decision makers hear us and understand us and implement what we want in this project?
I believe the answer was just do it.
All right.
Should I go next? So my name is Linda Sherman, and I created a blog post on boomertechtalk.com called Website Design for Seniors. And I really worked hard to collect websites that are accessible. It was really, really hard. You go to Jamal Tashan, who's one of the people who talks about accessibility. It's very hard to find examples. So if anybody here has a website they want to brag about, would you please tell me so that I can put it on my website as an example? I'm collecting factoids and all kinds of things, and we tried to build something, miracleofthesea.com, to be like that. But please, so Twitter is @LindaSherman, or get me at boomertechtalk.com. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Morton. I'm David Wolpaw. I have a question about governance. So you mentioned earlier that WordPress hadn't been making any decisions in the past. We've chosen to stay out of the decision-making process because no one speaks for WordPress. So if there is a governance project, what is your thought if somebody decides, oh, you're making a governance decision that I don't agree with, and I would just say you don't speak for me because I use a software, I'm not part of this decision-making process. I guess what I mean is basically, if someone is making a decision on behalf of WordPress, doesn't that mean they're making a decision on behalf of 32.5% of the web?
That's the challenge. So this is one of those things where, if you think about it, lack of participation is a choice, right? It's the whole thing about if you don't vote in an election, you're actively not voting in an election. The biggest challenge that we face now is that we need to figure out how to do this. The good news is there are other people who've already started tackling this challenge. The Node project has a governance process that it took them years to walk through, and they actually got somewhere with it. The Drupal project is currently working on a governance project to try to figure out how to manage the Drupal community. The AMP project just announced their governance setup. So there are models in place. What we need to do is figure out, what do those models look like for us? We need to define what is governance for WordPress. We need to define, what does that mean? What are the powers? What are the rights and privileges that are granted to people who are decision makers? How do we choose those people? What do they do? Who do they represent, and in what circumstances? And how do they push that representation forward? Because the reality is, when we don't do anything, a politician can go and say, hey, hello, like if Drupal shows up and goes to a politician and says, hey, we disagree with your decision. The politician comes back and says, you present, what, 2% of the web? The 32% aren't here. So we're not going to listen to you because the majority isn't speaking. So we're just going to assume they're okay with whatever we do. So we need to figure that out. That's why we need to have these conversations.
I'm not an audience plant, but I like that you had slides ready to go for my answer. For me. Thank you.
Okay, folks, this will be our last question. Go ahead.
Hi, Morten. You might have just answered this, but I noticed in the definition of democratizing, there was the idea of bringing democratic principles to something. So I wondered if you're suggesting that we actually elect leadership to represent the whole.
I think that is probably the toughest part of this process. Personally, and I say this as a former politician, I don't think that would work. I think we need to look at a different kind of governance model. We might actually have to come up with a new type of governance model, but we cannot do that in a vacuum, because every decision we make is a decision we make on behalf of the web. So when we think about governance, we need to look at what everyone else is doing. We need to talk to everyone else and say, hey, how do we do this thing? And how do we do it in such a way that it lasts, so that we get to whatever it is we want to get to? We need to define where we want to go, but before we can do that, we need to define how we define that. This is the important work, and it has to happen now. That's not a really good answer, but it's all I have. So, since that was the last question, if you are interested in this, we put up a little Google form to capture your email so that you can get notified about when we organize our first meeting. I invite you all to come. The Google form meets GDPR compliance standards and things. We promise not to send advertisements. We will only use it to send you an alert about when the first meeting is. And thank you all for coming. Thank you all for listening. And forward WordPress.
All right, folks, we will start our next talk at 10 o'clock. That gives you time to take a break, stretch your legs, move around. And, of course, you can come bug Morten with more questions if you want to. Folks, we're going to get going here. I have the honor of introducing our speakers for the next talk. And our speakers today are Joost de Wak, who is the founder and CEO of Joost. He has lots of experience in web development and consulting. And also today we will have speaking his partner in life and partner in business, Marieke van der Rak, who is a background in sociology and communication sciences. She is the founder of the Joost Academy and an expert in SEO, and also has a PhD in social sciences, so she knows what she's talking about when it comes to how people think and communicate on the web. Without further ado, the founders of the Joost Company.
Thank you. This is awkward. I got it.
This one's easier.
So we're here, and we've already been introduced. But
Yeah, so we've got slides on that.
yes, this is me, and yeah, this is you.
That's me.
Yeah. Do you want to tell anyone?
No, yeah, they know that. It's all boring. What's more important is this one. People don't always realize this, but there's actually 4 of us that run Joost. Omar's here in front. So if you want to bug people about things at Joost, Omar's a better person to bug than me.
Yeah. And actually, we're on it. So Michiel, who's not here, but he's watching
Hi
us. So
there.
hi, Michiel. And Michiel is, and I do the light side of Joost, which means it's marketing, Joost Academy, all the projects, all the
Yeah,
real
which
stuff.
makes me and Omar the dark side.
Yes.
That
And-
sort of works if you know us.
Yeah, and sometimes people cross over. We do that. Yeah.
Anyway, that's not what we're here for, though.
No, we're here to talk. But usually we talk about SEO. And we're not going to do that today. So we're going to have a talk which is kind of a business talk or community talk about open source, talk about how WordPress changed my life, all of that in one talk. It's going to be great. So it's basically a talk about why we love open source, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about why we love it so much to start with just now. And then we'll also show that it's totally true that you can also make money with an open source project. So we'll show you how we make money, but also some examples from other companies and other stories. But it's not all about making money, because if you take the making money part too far, it will backfire. So we'll tell you a little bit about that as well. But to start, why do we believe in open source? So there are actually 3 reasons why we think open source is so very great. And the first reason is that we believe that open source is the way to new knowledge and new solutions. I actually think it's the best way or the only way. 2 heads are always better than 1. The knowledge of 2 people or more people combined will always exceed the knowledge of just 1 person. And if people, especially people from different backgrounds, from different companies, work together and cooperate on one project, that project will benefit. So in short, if we stand on each other's shoulders, we become giants, and we should take advantage of each other's merits and talents. And the second reason why we believe in open source is because all the other ideas are just more wasteful. So if you look at a website of a hospital or of a school, there are millions of websites, and they're basically all the same. I totally get that a website needs a distinct design to make it look differently, but the functionality is pretty much the same. So everywhere around the world, developers are working and making projects that are basically the same. That's totally wasteful. We should not invent the wheel over and over again. And with WordPress, we have a wheel and we iterate on that wheel. That's just great. That's why we love it. And the third reason why we love open source so much is because it's an equalizer. In a project like in WordPress, everybody can participate. It doesn't matter where you live. It doesn't matter what you come from. It doesn't matter what gender you have. Everybody can help. Everybody can pitch in. It's very inclusive. It offers chances to everybody. Whether you have programming skills, or you love translating, or you have organizational skills, everybody can contribute. And now it's up to you, because it's about money.
So, for lots of people, open source is synonymous to free. That doesn't have to be true, but it is true for a lot of things. So WordPress is open source and it's free, and a lot of open source projects are also free software projects, but that doesn't mean that companies creating that software cannot be profitable companies. Open source does also not have to mean non-profit. There can be a lot of discussion about how you do all these things. But I'm going to show you, by showing you about the growth of a company I know fairly well, how open source can be profitable. So I started my own company in 2010. This was my office. It's not very glamorous. I can tell you that on the left of that picture, if I had zoomed out a bit more, you would have seen the washing machine. This was our attic. It was just me doing consulting. On the side, I had this hobby project called WordPress SEO that I really did as a hobby up until like 2012. At which point, my lovely wife, who always says that I'm the one talking about money, said to me, "This is no longer sustainable." I had 1 million users, a shit ton of email, and forum support requests and everything. And I was handling them on my own, because I thought that that thing had to be free completely, and that just doesn't scale. So we started doing things slightly differently, and we created WordPress SEO Premium, now known as Yoast SEO Premium, and the company has grown a bit since. This was our team last year.
at YostCon. And if you think this is a lot of people, we added another 30 this year. So, I mean, that group keeps on growing. So I started in 2010. I was on my own. Somewhere in 2012, I saw the light. And we started hiring people. This is all the current employees at Yoast by start year. To be fair, we've only ever hired 7 more that have left us. 2 of them have returned. So yeah, it's pretty good to be at Yoast, apparently. There's now 80 of us in the Netherlands and 20 more across the world in our support team and a couple of very notable developers. So what we've seen is that freemium is a very good model for software. A freemium product like Yoast SEO, where you have a free base that everybody gets to use, and a premium model that allows people that want to do things faster, or that's what we choose for, but that want to do extra things in the premium plugin. But as soon as you start doing that, you run into all sorts of problems. You see, we had this vision of Yoast, and that was SEO for everyone. That's distinctly different from SEO for everyone who can afford Yoast SEO Premium. So when we do major features that we think are important for the web, and yeah, we do think a bit like Morten, we put them in our free plugin. A couple of years ago, we released our readability analysis, which was a lot of work. And we put it in our free plugin with no counterparts in the premium plugin. The premium plugin has all that, but it's exactly the same as far as the readability stuff goes because we think it's that important. If you're going to need it to optimize your website, it should be accessible to everyone. That's probably not the most profitable decision we ever made. But at the same time, keeping true to those thoughts has helped us grow tremendously to the point where we're now a 10 million euros, real currency, a year company. This is no longer about small companies. And this number doesn't really matter. But it does matter that we all realize that we're no longer just small amateurs doing small things for tiny portions of the web. WordPress is 32.5% of the web. We're in the ridiculous stage where we ourselves see stats where we're like 4 or 5% of that 10 million, and you go like, ouch, that's a lot. It makes releasing a whole lot harder, which is why I sometimes have my opinions about that. But we're not alone. There are very different models in open source that work as well. I want to highlight a couple just to show that it doesn't have to be like this. Elastic is fun to mention because they, like us, are Dutch. They IPO'd earlier this year. They're now worth around 4 billion on the stock market. And if you read their prospectus, you would have seen that as of July 31st, 2018, they had 5,500 customers. So how you get to a valuation of 4 billion at 5,500 customers is completely beyond me. But that's what the stock market does. At the same time, they have very high value customers. We're one of them that pay a whole lot more than people pay for their plugins. It's a very different model where people make money on the high end. It's basically the same as what Acquia in the Drupal community does. They make money on the very high end of Drupal sites. There's another example, Magento. Also got sold this year for the meager sum of 1.7 billion US dollars. That's billion with a B. They make money by doing 2 things. They have their platform as a service, and they sell a premium version of Magento. If you've ever tried to install it, it's slightly more difficult than WordPress. And I would seriously suggest if you're doing e-commerce to look elsewhere, but at the same time, it's a very profitable, well-run company. I think the most exciting of all of them is Red Hat, a company that really only system administrators know really well, because they make a ton of software that people use to power those servers that we all use every day. They're very interesting because they have bought software companies and open sourced the software that they bought and made more money from it than the company did before. And they've not done that once, but they've done that multiple times. They too got sold this year. This is how I got to my list. For the meager sum of $34 billion to IBM. A couple of years ago, there was serious doubt as to whether open source companies could be profitable and could have very high valuation. There was a lot of shade being thrown over Automatic's valuation at some point. If you look at these numbers now, it's not that weird. But as Marika said earlier, this is all about the money, and it is not all about the money.
Hi. So a few years ago, actually on the first WordCamp Europe in Leiden, Joost did a talk about, and it was called The Victory of the Commons, and I'm going to do a short piece of that again because you didn't do it entirely correct. Yeah, so sorry.
See what I have to put up with.
So, the tragedy of the commons is a theory, a concept, and it was invented by Elinor Ostrom, who is an amazing economist and sociologist. And the theory described how a group of people acts when they share something, a common pool, resources. And I think that story, or the theory, is very applicable to our WordPress ecosystem. So let me explain the tragedy of the commons. Imagine a meadow. You can see a meadow with little sheep. Yeah, that meadow isn't owned by anybody. It's owned by a community of shepherds or farmers. And they can put sheep on their meadow. And the sheep can eat the grass, and they can play and do their thing on the meadow, and just be happy. So there's a community of shepherds. And it's important to understand that every shepherd can put a sheep on the meadow, and the sheep will grow, and it will give wool and lambs and meat and all stuff. And all the benefits from the sheep will be for the shepherd himself. And this is a bit like the open source project we have. WordPress is our meadow, and we all reap benefits from WordPress. So our company by selling plugins. Maybe agencies by building websites with this amazing CMS. What happens in this beautiful meadow is that every shepherd is motivated to add more animals, because more animals in the meadow will mean more profits for him individually. But an extra animal will also come with a cost. The meadow will face an extra sheep too, and will there be enough grass to eat? And because the meadow isn't owned by anybody, the costs of an extra animal will be for the entire community, while the gains will be for the individual. And here lies the tragedy of the commons, of the meadow, says Elinor Ostrom. So if every shepherd is focusing on his or her individual gain, they will put more and more sheep on that meadow. And the meadow will get too crowded. This will lead to overgrazing, and the meadow will become less and less productive. And if the shepherds will keep on thinking about themselves, this will continue. And if people only think about their own gain, they will keep doing that, because everybody else is doing it anyway. So it's better to have like a really small, unhealthy sheep than no sheep at all. So in the end, this will lead to a tragedy. The meadow will get ruined. It's such a tragedy. So Elinor Ostrom uses this example to show how common good projects can go wrong. And I want to reassure you, I don't think that WordPress is going this way. I think WordPress is flourishing. But it does demonstrate that thinking only of your own interests could lead to really damaging an open source ecosystem. And that's because of the free rider problem. I think Most of you have heard about this. So if people only think about their own interest, common pool resources tend to get ruined. A few free riders is never a big problem, but if everybody would think that way, then a project will get ruined. So this is Adam Smith. He's one of the founders of modern economics. And he said, for quite a while, and people still believe him, that if every individual does what's best for him, then the outcome would be the best for everybody. So if everybody would just do what's best for him, then we'll have an optimal situation. Well, Elinor Ostrom already showed Adam Smith was wrong. And then this other guy, this really awesome guy, he also showed it mathematically. So this is John Nash, and if you've seen the movie A Beautiful Mind, you will know whom I'm talking about, and otherwise you should watch that movie. So according to John Nash, the optimal result will come when people do what's best for them and what's best for the group. So the total optimal results will only come when you think of yourself and of the group. So a shepherd should think of their own gain and of the gain for the entire meadow. Applying that to the WordPress community would mean that you should invest in open source software as well, so in WordPress core or in WordCamps or stuff, as well as in your individual gain. Because in our case, when Joost was just doing his plugins in the attic and making very little money, he couldn't cope with it. You can't cope with 1 million users all by yourself. It was really sad. You were sad at some point. Yeah. So, because you can't answer all these questions. You can't do that. And when we were making money, the project became better and everything became better. So that's the point I want to make. So John Nash mathematically proved this pretty early on in his career, that this could be calculated. So he calculated an equilibrium, the Nash equilibrium. So the optimal results will appear when harvesting your meadow and reaping the fruits is in the right proportion. And I think now you're up.
So I'm not able to calculate a Nash equilibrium for WordPress. If someone else here is, I would like to see it, but my math skills are pretty limited. But Matt once spoke about 5% for the future, and I think more than once, but he's spoken about this idea of companies spending 5% of their resources to improve WordPress. We think that's a great idea, and we've been doing that for quite a while. If everybody did that, and that includes everybody who makes money from the WordPress project, every host, every agency, etc., there would be a few more of us in those weekly dev chats. So we do a lot of this. We put at least 5% of our developer time on WordPress core. I have to admit, in the last year, we had this small project that a few more people of our team worked on. So in the last year, it's been about 10 to 15% of our total developer resources that worked on Gutenberg. But we also had other people working on other stuff that we think is important for the global project. So if you've heard about Serve Happy, the people involved in that are mostly sponsored by us. There are a lot of other things happening, like fixes on the forums by Sergey, and a whole lot of specific things that we think need to happen to keep that meadow green and all those gates in order, etc. But that's just developer time, and one of the things that is so clear is that there's more than development. We sponsor a lot of WordCamps, and we speak at them. We organize them. There's a couple of people here in front who spend too much time at WordCamps. That's all giving back to the community as well, and even that is very limited to this group. I get excited even more when we look at our local projects, when Taco is teaching young kids to build their first WordPress site in our town. or when Omar spends every Friday morning helping unemployed people to teach them how to build a website in WordPress and how to do SEO so they get a better chance at employment. That is growing our pie and making WordPress truly bigger. But, and there's a common theme in the two talks this morning, we all want to keep WordPress healthy. This means that if we need to help, even if that does not directly benefit our company. Sometimes you have to put aside your egos, which in my case is a fairly hard task. But we need to think about what's good for WordPress and what's good for our individual companies. And it's really okay to think about that last thing too. There's nothing wrong with thinking about yourself, but you have to think about both. In order to keep that meadow healthy, we all need to give back. And aside from giving back, we need to come up with some ground rules. If one of us is fixing the fence on the one end, it's not really cool if someone else is opening the gate on the other end. If someone wants to give some extra water here, while someone else is doing nutrition there, that might go wrong. A lot of these things need some work. And I'll give you a very concrete example. I and we as a team were not really Gutenberg fanboys from the start. The thing is, we heard about it in June 2017, and we were like, that has some rather big implications for a plugin. It more or less meant redoing half of our code, which, if you have ever looked at our code base, you can imagine is a tiny bit of work. But after the initial, descent, we decided, okay, we're going to step in and we're going to try and do this. And we figured out, hey, we need to help make Gutenberg better because we can't really do what we want to do yet. So we started adding APIs to Gutenberg to make it extensible for plugin authors and make it better. That part is fine. The problem lies in the fact that we heard about it in June 2017, and I read last week in Matt's blog post that they started developing in January 2017. So what happened in those 6 months? Why did we find out so late? And how could our community communication be so poor that people were developing on a project on the one hand, and we were building stuff that we literally had to throw away on the other hand, and we didn't know? So we need to get better at that. We were literally burning some of our 5% time in those months because we were doing the wrong things. So the biggest problem here is probably communication.
Yeah, sure. So we want to prevent this tragedy. And actually, Eleanor Ostrom's solution to the tragedy of the commons was communication. Just get some rules. Just get those shepherds to understand that it's important to nourish their meadow. And I think we need to do the same thing. And otherwise, the 3 reasons I started with why open source is so very, very important or very, very awesome, they will be jeopardized. Because if we're not cooperating, then we're not standing on each other's shoulders. Then we're doing things their own way. And we will not come up with those great innovations. We need to communicate in order to come up with those great innovations and new knowledge and solutions. And if we're not communicating, it's really, really wasteful. So I see someone painting the fence on one hand, and then someone else building an entirely new fence and just putting it on that meadow. And then all the painting has been done for nothing. And we as a group have become so very big that it's very hard to communicate with each other, and we don't know what we're all doing. And I do not have the solution for that. I just think that we need to think about how to make sure that people are doing things that are going in the same direction instead of opposite. Because I know everybody is doing their best, and it's such a waste of energy if you're doing something that's not useful in a month or so. And also, if we're not communicating, then not everybody can participate, because then only the people who come up with a really beautiful new fence get their way. And that shouldn't be the thing. It should be an equalizer. Everybody should be able to pitch in. That's the beauty of open source. That's what I wanted to say. No, you want to say something, I'm sure.
I do. So we're all in this together. It's more true in this project than in a whole lot of other things. But I think our communication needs to level up, and we need a roadmap and a plan of where are we going, and not just a development roadmap, but a wider thing. So we own this matter together, and if we want to grow it, and our companies, and everything that's related to it, we need to lead this together too. I was very happy to see what got us here won't get us there on Morton's slides. I agree, and it doesn't apply just to code. It applies to everything in this project. So let's get that discussion started. Thank you.
Folks, we have time for some questions. If you have a question, we have 2 microphones set up on either side of the room here in the aisles. Please come up and ask those questions so our live stream viewers can hear you. Or if you need me to bring the mic to you, please raise your hand and I will bring it over.
Hi, I'm Christina. I am both a small business owner and on the organizing team for this campus, or WordCamp US, which has been a lot of work and more than my personal 5%, perhaps. And kind of my thoughts are around how much we ask of each other when we're all coming from very different places. And I think it's interesting, like, to hear Morton say, we need to do more. And then you're like, oh, we all need to do more. And I'm like, oh my God, I've done so much. And I'm a small business owner and I don't have the backing of a other company or whatever. And then in my life as well, I promise this as a question. I also am involved in the Wikipedia world, which is another very big global community. We're all nerds in many ways. And they have a lot of thoughts about all of this governance and stuff, but I never hear any of the WordPress people talking about how Wikipedia does it, or the way users, like the barrier to entry is so much different in the Wikipedia world than it is in the WordPress world, where you maybe have to understand Slack or complicated dev things, or this whole community that is confusing and foreign. So I guess my question is, I heard a lot of things about like the people making money, but how do we live in a world when a lot of us know that this will never be profitable for us? How do we still give without driving ourselves crazy and draining all of our resources? What does the Commons say about that?
I think for this audience, we're preaching for the wrong audience, because you're already doing your 5%. And I think if you're not making money out of WordPress, the only thing you can give is time. And that's it. But there are a lot of companies who are making a lot of money, and they should be giving back 5% money-wise, I guess.
And also, I think it's up to the WordPress project to make sure that if you're giving that much more than the 5% that you actually have to give, but what you can do meaningfully without hurting your own business. I think the project as a whole could do more to reward you for what you're doing and make sure that you get new business out of this, or whatever we could do to highlight people that are doing this stuff. Because then it becomes mutually beneficial, and we can all benefit from this. So I know that Joseph has been working on a 5% project for like a while. we have to find that equilibrium a bit more, and I can totally understand that organizing a WordCamp like this is draining.
Yeah.
I mean, we had 2 people on the WordCamp Europe organizing team last year, and if I look at the hours, I go like, dude, I don't really look at the hours, but it's like,
go like, dude.
it's a lot of time. It's a large investment, even for us. So I can totally imagine that it's a large investment if you're an individual. But thank you.
Hey, I'm Jake. I'm the founder of 10up. I'd like to hear more from you about the intersection between governance and commercialized solutions, because I think one of the things that's unique about our open source community, I think wonderful about our open source community in many ways, and that it spawns amazing companies like your own, is that we have a number of what I would describe as almost canonical solutions at this point for problems that I would say are pretty critical to the mass audience of WordPress. The solutions that arguably maybe at some point should even be in core, be a part of, for other CMSs, be a part of that core platform. Not just SEO, which I think is germane to you, but forms, calendars, events, a lot of solutions that take on massive scale.
There's a lot of features in our plugin that should be in core.
100%. So like, I guess my question is, when you think about governance and you think about entities that are outside the core open source project in many ways, in their own commercial entities, is there a role for governance in major solutions that a massive part of the community adapts and become almost critical to 50% of the use cases of the platform?
Well, yeah, but I think they've already admitted to that in a bit. This week we started on end-to-end tests for Gutenberg that activate some of the largest plugins and run some tests to make sure that we didn't break anything in that. I think that's, I mean, this is an incredibly big ecosystem that I don't just like Marika said, I don't have the solution to this. It's a very hard problem in many ways, but to a certain extent, we have a mutual responsibility to make sure that we keep stuff working. And we've always done that with our backwards compatibility ideas, and with Gutenberg, we've done away with some of that, but not really even all that much. I think in the end, we've reached a pretty good state of where backwards compatibility is achieved, and people can still keep on running things, and all the large plugins sort of work, and some better than others, because some work with Gutenberg and others work in spite of Gutenberg. But well, I think it's a mutual responsibility, and I think the core team is quite aware that if they break a big plugin, they're going to get as much whining as when they break something in core itself that not a whole lot of people use.
Thanks.
Hi, this is a question about profitability in open source and specifically the freemium model. So it seems to me that the freemium model is based on a trust in the community that in giving some of your work away, they will see that value and repay it. But I also notice a pattern that most companies that operate on a freemium model open source portions of their code, and then other portions are kept in private repositories. Is that a sign to you that trust has its limits? Is that an example of like that Nash equilibrium, looking out for yourself while also giving back? And is that the right move?
It's hard. So some of our premium repositories are open, some are closed. I can't really find a difference in the two in terms of how profitable they are or whatever. So I think that some of in the end, we will probably end up opening up most of our repositories, because I think that's the easiest thing to do, because even to our premium plugin, people want to do pull requests, and I'm fine with people giving code. But what you
in it too.
No, what is happening a bit more at the moment is that you see companies move to a SaaS model for their premium offerings. We've recently done that. Jetpack has always done that. So there's more and more companies that are moving slowly in that direction, because it's a little easier to control, and the trust factor doesn't become as big of a problem. There's no easy solutions in that game. It's pretty hard to do right and to figure out a good equilibrium that works for your company. And for us, I mean, it's gotten us a lot of growth, And at times it's even hard to look at, okay, so we want to do 5%, we've grown this much, that means that we need to do this much more in the next year. You saw that in Matt's recent post as well. Like he was saying that they'd add some more committers or developers because Automatic has grown. I think that's a good thing. It's over time these things work out, and everybody has to come up with their own set of how do we do this and how does this work. And maybe over time we can even collaborate on some of that between some of these companies.
Thank you. Hi, Mariek. Hi, Joost. Thanks for a good talk. It's pretty inspiring. The WordPress project has suffered traditionally from a bit of a bottleneck with contributors because of this kind of tiny team of committers who have to deal with all of the contributions of WordPress. How can the project and the community go about deciding on a governance model that kind of gets rid of this bottleneck? You know, this dependency on a few small people who, a small group of people who can.
They're all pretty small too.
Yeah. Apart from your Dutch guys. Yeah. How can the community kind of figure out a good governance model to reduce this problem of a bottleneck?
Yeah, you do that.
So, to be honest, I don't think the bottleneck of the WordPress community right now is developers. I think the bottleneck lies in the project management layer just above that. And, well, that needs work. It needs a bit more of a, as I said, a roadmap. It needs a bit more of an idea of where we're going that is laid out in proper like posts or pages on WordPress.org where I can see what we're going in and what the direction is and what we're going to build and what makes sense to work on and what doesn't make sense to work on. Because right now we let everybody work on whatever they want, which is, I think, to a certain extent fine, but we're not always going to merge everything that everybody's doing. So we need to come up with a better way of managing that and a better way of managing the expectations around it. And I don't really think that the number of developers is even the problem. I think that the problem is that we have this layer of developers that have commit rights, but there's no like architectural decisions being made in some group that then everybody works on. It just sort of happens. And I would like us to have a bit more of architectural like leads and go to a model where there's an architectural board that decides we're going to build it like this. And then another group of people probably should decide on what it is that we're going to build. But these are distinct different things where you decide on what you're going to build and how you're going to build it. And in every company in the world, these things are separated entities. And I wouldn't mind WordPress being run a bit more like a global company. But I mean, that's my view at it. At the same time, I think we just need to have that discussion with everybody involved and see like where do we end up.
Going to do that in January.
Apparently we're going to do that in January, but I'm open to starting today.
Great, thanks.
All right, folks, we have time for either one more long question or two really quick ones. So we'll start right over there.
I've been pressured.
I hope it was quick.
Hi, my name is Toru Miki. I came from Tokyo. I gave a talk yesterday. My question is that you mentioned better communication is needed. Could you possibly elaborate a bit more on that? Because do you mean as simply more number of conversations or different way of visualizing the discussion that has been made or the summaries of made? And I also asked this because I'm from Japan, you're from Holland, and I think you know the way people think when you get asked about better communication, people tend to interpret it a little differently. So the way you communicate, what they think better communication is different from the culture to regions. And
absolutely, yeah.
The whole .org development is done in English, which I personally have no complaints about it or anything. But since not 100% of WordPress users is English language, I think it's about 50, 40, something like that. something like that, I think. Is there something to fill that gap in some way or another?
You're making it even harder now.
Sorry.
Yeah, you're totally right. That's a cultural thing as well. I don't.
It is. I can elaborate a lot more, but let's do that off stage. But I do think that in essence it means that we have a vision of where we want to go that is slightly more than a vision, but has like, okay, so these are the things that we're going to build, and this is the plan for the coming year or year or two. Mm-hmm. That is slightly better laid out than it has been for the last year. The problem was with Gutenberg that there was a lot of thinking like that, but it wasn't on paper, and it was very hard for people to find out what the goal was. And I think that if we had gotten that a lot earlier, it would have been a lot easier for a lot of people to see, hey, this is actually very cool, and we need to step in on this.
Maybe democratizing publishing is a bit too broad to work on.
Yeah, so I think that's the biggest thing. It needs to go from, okay, so this is our vision, this is what that looks like in our vision, let's discuss those steps, and then let's go from there.
Thank you.
Oh.
Thank you.
Sorry, I realized it was the wrong question.
That's all right. That's all the time we have today, folks. Please give our speakers one more round of applause. Today we're going to be starting in about 2 minutes. 2 minutes till our talk here. Just a quick reminder that we have plenty of seats, but if you sit on the end of the row and don't let anybody in, then we can't share all those wonderful seats. So please make new friends and get closer together. Closer together so that nobody winds up standing. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, folks of all colors, shapes, and sizes, we're going to get our talk started here. One more reminder, could you please make new friends and squish in? Don't leave empty seats open in the middle, please. We definitely want to make sure everybody has a place to sit. All right, I am very honored to introduce our speaker today. She comes to us from the Wharton School of Business. She is the CEO and founder of BuzzMG and the academic director of leadership in the business world at the Wharton School. She is also from my favorite part of the country, Pennsylvania, where I grew up. Oh, Pittsburgh, huh? Philly forever, from my point of view. All right, folks, without further ado, I would like to introduce Tina Wells.
Thank you so much. Well, good morning. I'm so honored to be here. And anytime I give a talk, I like to open up with really what the intention is. And so for me today, the intention is to get all of you really comfortable with marketing and to have you walk away feeling like you could really be in control of your own marketing. So I want to give you a little background about how I started. I started my company, Buzz Marketing Group, when I was 16, and it's been 22 years now, and I never thought I'd be a marketer. I really wanted to be a fashion editor, and at 15 rather, I took a job with a newspaper writing product reviews. It was called the New Girl Times, and every time I would send a company a review, they would say, if I send you more product, will you tell me what you think? And so I thought I had landed the dream job of just testing products and telling companies what I thought about them. And that continued for a couple years until a client, and I use air quotes because they were just people who sent me product, told me that the research I had done with my friends was better than something she'd paid $25,000 for, and that I had a business and it was in market research and I should figure it out. And happened to be a freshman in college and went to the head of the business department, and we talked. I took an independent study and really started to build out the company. And then in 2000, Cosmo Girl wrote about what we were doing. It was literally 2 sentences in a magazine that got us 15,000 applications from people all over the world who wanted to be buzz spotters, and that's what we call our trend spotters. Fast forward to today, we have 40,000 people in our research network, and we've served over 165 companies, and this is just a few of our clients. And so, I'm very fortunate to go into organizations and normally work with C-suite executives and really talk to them about the major problem that they're having. And I like to say a lot of my work is the problem that keeps a CEO or CMO up at night. It's the one they whisper about and the one they say, we've got to figure out a solution to this, or I don't know what's going to happen with the company, or we need to make a pivot. And I think we're in a really interesting time right now where we're watching really big companies grapple with really big problems. And we're seeing a lot of new, emerging, smaller companies that are digitally native or direct to consumer who are opening up really big marketing opportunities. And so it's a really interesting time to be a marketer for sure. Okay, this one didn't translate. So on this slide, I also want to talk about another part of our business. So we coin a lot of trends and a lot of different words. And so I just want to give you an example of a few of the trends we've coined over the years. And so I think the one that put me on the map years ago was this idea called Warholism. And so about 10 years ago, we identified that, if you know the famous Andy Warhol quote, he says, in the future, everyone will have their 15 minutes of fame. And so as a marketer, that really took on a different meaning, right? I grew up in the 90s where the only way a real person could ever be on TV was to be one of 7 strangers picked to live in the house on MTV's The Real World, right? That was the only way you would ever be famous. Fast forward to the time we started talking about Warholism, Fisher-Price released a toy. It was a karaoke machine that you hooked up to your TV, and instantly a 2-year-old watched themselves on TV. And I started to think about that. What is the impact for marketing when what used to be a one-way conversation of, I tell you this, you go do this behavior, you buy this thing to make you feel this way, has totally changed, and we started to really realize that the relationship between a customer and the company making the product for them was really fundamentally changing. Another trend we coined years ago was an idea called mass-exclusivity. And it was the idea that we all could own the same product that needed to be customized to us. And so the iPod was one of the first products we saw that was a mass-exclusive product. We all could own it and all have an individual experience. Again, really, really tough if you're a big marketer, right? We saw Nike really found a way to do it with Nike ID. You can customize your Nike sneakers. American Eagle or Levi's, you can go into the store, customize how you want your jeans ripped. But the idea that customers were having a bigger voice was something that was really emerging. And one final trend I really loved coining was this idea we called cake baking. And it came about from a little-known movie called Mr. and Mrs. Smith, right? And what we all learned on that movie was that Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt fell in love, right? And it was everywhere. And what was interesting is not a lot of people went to see the movie, and so it, again, fundamentally changed marketing because what do? We talk a lot about a product and then we want you to go buy the product. What happens when the talk about the product becomes more fascinating than the product itself? And so marketing fundamentally has really, really changed a lot over the last 10 to 15 years. So as a classical marketer, there are 4 things that you need to know about marketing. First, I'll back up and say when we talk about marketing, marketing is really everything that happens between you making your product and someone buying it. All of those activities in between really fall under marketing. And then when we talk about marketing as a practice, there are really 4 areas we talk about. So product, place, promotion, and price. And so with product, there are some products where the actual creation of the product is in fact the marketing. So whether you see someone on Shark Tank and they make a magical sponge that does all of this, the actual product is what's talked about. It's how the brand is marketed. It's built around this product. The concept of place. When I started in marketing, place was Macy's, Bloomingdale's, Marshall Field's, and now place has really evolved to be your website, right? That's the first place people tend to experience a brand. And for many of these big retailers, especially those in consumer-driven businesses, it's still the number one place people are making purchases. They may put a lot of money and resources behind their bricks and mortar locations, but quietly they'll tell you the number one place we're driving revenue is online. When we talk about promotion, there are several different areas. So promotion, we look at paid, unpaid, or earned, as we call it, and owned. And so again, your website is your own channel, your social feeds. When we talk about earned, it's really PR, right? Free media, what people say about your brand, what people on social media are saying about it. And then paid, which is advertising, a totally different part of the strategy. And then we know that price can be a really big part of marketing, right? So think about some of the direct-to-consumer brands. The biggest differentiator they talk about is by coming to us directly, we can charge you a lot less money, right? Price is really important. Or now it's even got its own category where it's called pricing transparency, right? We're going to be very transparent about what this actually costs. So in all of these classical areas for us, product, place, promotion, price, they've all dramatically shifted. And the very definition of what those things mean has really changed. And that's actually really great news for small business owners. You know, of all the companies I get to work with, I am most passionate and most excited to work with small business owners. I think that, you know, I remember when my team, when we first discovered WordPress, and one of the things I thought for my smaller clients was, now we've democratized the market, right? We make it easier for people to find their customer and to talk to them and to have a product that's competitive and to have a web presence that speaks just like any other store. And so while it's created a lot of opportunity for small businesses, it's actually being very disruptive for big businesses. And so, you know, it's a really interesting place right now. So what I want to talk about is just from all the companies I've worked with, 10 things I've learned about marketing. And they're the 10 things that I think if you walk away with anything, a few of them I hope you think about as you start to create your own marketing. So the first thing I've learned is that all consumers are not created equal. I am definitely a person who is known, I think my title that a magazine gave me is the Millennial Whisperer. I grew up with millennials. I started studying them before they were millennials. I was literally in the right time at the right place and had tons of them that I was, you know, talking to. And the one thing I can admit, I don't know if many of my colleagues will admit this, is that there was kind of this like millennial mania that we created, right? It's like, if you don't know them, your business will die, right? So we kind of like scared everyone so much that when they actually needed to pay attention to them, they were burnt out. They were like, I just don't even care anymore, right? It was like, millennials will do this, they'll kill your business, they're so big, you have to do all these things. And the reality is now, when the average millennial is, 33, 34, you know, married, 2 kids, looking at buying property, now's the time where many businesses actually need to look at them. But historically, we get very excited about new and emerging demographics. We scare people, and then we don't properly shift business in the way it needs to move forward. And so this is just an example of the way think about really big businesses look today. And so one of the biggest challenges businesses have right now is that for the first time in history, there are 5 generations of people who are working together in organizations. It's another reason why I think it's a great opportunity and a great time for small businesses. You know, if you are a Comcast, or think of any large Fortune 500 company, you're dealing with the changes in consumer behavior, the changes in media options, how many different ways there are for people to find out about your product. And within your own company, the people that need to come together to make decisions are dealing with all of this stuff, right? We have, if you think about Gen X, right? I love Gen Xers. And any big company I've ever been in, Gen X is really, those are the people who keep everything together. Right, they're managing up, they're managing down, they're just cool, they're keeping it together, like, I just need this to get done, you know? You have boomers who are renewed with energy. People in their 50s are, to me, the most interesting people to talk about right now. You know, that if you think about the advances in healthcare, they are younger than ever. They're more vibrant than ever. They actually do have some money, you know? And, you know, they're now trying to figure out the next stage of their life. There's a crisis within my friends of their parents not wanting to be grandparents because they're living their best lives right now, right? So they have abandoned the idea of being grandparents. You know, my mom just turned 60 and she's always like looking at a career change. I'm like, Mom, you're 60 and people are like hiring you for these? She's like, yeah, I think I'm going to diversify. I'm like, you know, so there's a lot going on with boomers. There's Gen X saying, I wish you would just retire, all of you, because I need to move up, right? So you've got people stuck in their jobs, right? Then you've got like people like get out. Then you have Gen Z. It's like, I'm so excited to be here. It's my first job. This is so awesome. A computer, you know? And then you have millennials. It's like everything needs to change. Everything is wrong. When am I getting promoted? What's next for me? And this is going on internally, and we're not even dealing with the idea that we need to sell people stuff, right? So this is just what really makes me laugh these days. I'm like, this is what's happening. These are what big, and so when you look at the Warby Parkers of the world, you know, it's like, this is what we believe. This is our ethos. If you've ever been to Warby Parker, they all dress the same. They all talk the same. everybody's on the same page, right? There's just a feeling of like, we're doing something really important and we're stylish and everybody's on the, and you have these big companies, it's like our board of directors won't retire, and all the scandal are in the biggest companies ever, right? Like I was reading a headline yesterday about the Oscars, and it's a really funny headline about Kevin Hart, and it was just like, he totally screwed up, he wouldn't apologize. I was like, can we back up for 1 second? Who hired him? Did no one use a piece of technology to go through every single thing he's publicly said for his entire career to say, could anything be offensive? You know, it's like, I actually don't fault him for not apologizing. Who hired you? You know, who actually made that decision? And one of my friends, we were texting, she said, oh, it's probably just some, you know, older person that's like, he gets the kids excited, let's hire him. You know, and we'll get into the art and science part of marketing, but that's what's happening. It's, you know, there's so much information available that we're watching a lot of really big missteps. You know, we're watching a Pepsi commercial that's supposed to be about social activism, and the way you fix everything is Kendall Jenner just hands you a Pepsi, right? It's like, how does that happen? It happens because like all of this is going on. So, you know, I think when we think about consumers, when you think about your customer, you know, we'll talk a bit about not believing the hype, but really drill down to like, what are the numbers saying? What does the data show? And how do I actually reach the people I'm trying to reach and not pay attention to the noise? A big part of my job is really filtering all day. What's real? What's noise? You know, what makes sense? The second point is, you know, trends are cyclical. You know, I'm right now, we at my company study four tribes. We call them tribes of trendsetters: preppies, techies, alternatives, and independents. And about 15 years ago, I introduced this concept. I was doing some work for Verizon, and they said, we're going to launch a prepaid phone, and we're going to target a really cool person. I said, a cool person is not buying a prepaid phone. That's like not happening. I said, actually, they were like, well, but we need them to launch it. I said, well, you know, there's this new tribe emerging, and they're techies, and they're like, but nobody, they're nerds. Nobody talks to them. I'm like, no, actually the world is changing, and these people, I predict, are going to be the coolest people ever. And they thought I was crazy. And then like a year ago, after that, Richard Branson launches like Virgin's prepaid phone. It was a Matrix phone. It was massively successful, and it actually did pay attention to that trend. And so, you know, I always love to study this tribe we call independents, because they're very counterculture, and whatever they're doing, literally in a few years will be the trend. You know, so there are people now who show up at retail stores to trade clothes. Right? It's like there's no currency that exchanges. They're just doing clothing swaps. You know, there are people who are like very dedicated to writing and handwriting letters now, right? So while we're all kind of like, oh, people aren't going to write again, there are people who are doing that. And, you know, like all trends, things come in and out of style. You know, one of the biggest trends is TV. You know, in my industry, people always talk about things are dead, right? It's like, oh, print is dead. I'm like, no, bad print is, and it should be, right? The problem with print is that people don't see themselves as brands. If print were dead, Chip and Joanna Gaines couldn't launch a magazine to millions of people. Why do we love them? Because like we see their kids. And I went to Waco, Texas to go see what this was all about, right? And waited in line to buy a cupcake, you know? And the whole way, my friend's like, why are we going to Waco? It's like, no, we just have to be in this vibe, right? And they have like 500 people who are working for them. So clearly print's not dead. Bad print is dead. People who don't actually understand that brands are alive and vibrant, that's what's dying. Years ago, we were all told TV was dead, right? Now you're looking at who's nominated for Golden Globes, and it reads literally it's like Hollywood's A-list is nominated in TV roles, right? And competing and fighting for TV. TV's never been more interesting and more exciting. And, you know, one of the things we'll talk about in a bit is that, you know, media just evolves, right? Now we're in the content business. If only Blockbuster had realized it was in the content business, right? You know, the fact that Blockbuster didn't become Netflix is a huge misstep. You know, that they didn't understand we just wanted to take content differently. You know, so people who are, you know, and we see it every day, they're hanging on to bricks and mortar, right? Like, no, we just have to, no, like sometimes you just got to let it go and say, what's the next iteration of how we can make this better? So marketing is equal parts arts and science. I think this is the part of marketing that marketers struggle with the most. That's why you'll find creative agencies and market research shops. I happen to sit absolutely in the center of both. I actually write a best-selling children's fiction series called Mackenzie Blue, and I would often say in that process, I was literally doing this to myself. Well, creatively, I want to do this. As a business person, this makes sense. When we created her as a character, I literally went to moms and went to girls and said, okay, what can we do to get girls interested in science? What can we do about mean girl culture? And what came out of it was equal parts art and science. And a lot of times when we as marketers make mistakes, it's because we've gone too far in one direction and not informed by the other. And it is one of the only disciplines where you really do have to pay attention to art and science at the same time. I think direct-to-consumer brands do a really good job of this, but I also think that they're in a really troubled position right now because they happen to build their companies at a time where Facebook ad revenue or Facebook ad machine was really also on an upswing, right? So now when we're having a bit of a correction, everyone's freaking out. And I'm saying, no, you guys just have to go back to understanding the fundamentals of the art and the science, right? Channels sometimes perform crazy good, and you can't predict that that's going to happen. But still, as marketers, we have to understand our product, our place, our promotion, our price, always. And if at any point our algorithm is off, it's really because either we're not being creative enough or we don't deeply understand the consumer enough. That's what happened to a lot of companies who went millennial crazy. They just didn't pay attention to the fact that this group of 50-somethings was doing something really interesting, right? That their life was fundamentally changing in a way where they did have money. And it's always, I love talking to boomers, like, no one talks to me. I have tons of money to spend. No one cares to talk to me, because we get so hyped up. But if we actually looked at numbers, we can see that trends were evolving. I often talk about this a lot when I talk about the election. The numbers were always there. It's just we didn't want to think about it. 5 years ago, MTV did a really interesting study from their public affairs department and talked about millennials as a generation. So 80 million people felt that their government was something that they actually had to overcome, that they had to create solutions. So whether you think about Uber or Airbnb, it's like, well, we're going to create the companies that actually handle the problems that we think are really big problems. And so, thinking about an anti-establishment mindset going into elections, that exists. And so, a lot of times we do, in fact, ignore data because it doesn't support what we want to think. And we do that as marketers too. Marketers are people, and we don't always look at data and say, this is the very best decision we should make. Don't believe the hype. Again, there's a lot of hype. And as marketers, it's, and I'm sure you all hear it all the time. It's like SEO, SEM, it's dead. It's not working. It's like, well, things evolve. Of course it's working. Are you actually putting the right things into it, right? Are you testing the right creative? Are you connecting with the audience in the right way? These are all tools. They're all tools that need to be properly utilized. Same with a website. You know the difference between a really good site that connects and a really bad site. Yesterday I had a really interesting experience. I was on Instagram and I got this ad from this I think it was called Women Executives in Heels. I was like, that's a really interesting name. So I click on it and it's like, we have this journal. And I'm like, this is very pretty. Okay, I'm going to buy this. I can easily buy it with PayPal. Then I get an email and it's like, welcome to the community. This is all the things we do. This is our manifesto. And then I see this really beautiful card. And it's like, if you buy 10 of them, you get 45% off. I've never seen this person before in my life and spent $100 with them in less than an hour. And told my friends, why didn't we create these cards? These cards are very cool, It was just that this person somehow figured out that I was the target and that I was likely to buy from her. And then I went to see, well, she must be some very famous person. She had 2,000 followers on Instagram. It's like she just really seemed to get to the point of I'm going to ignore all of this hype and just go through the funnel of saying, this is how I get to my target customer. Okay, so this is my favorite tip. I did the majority of my research in airports. There are lots of people. They're all very different. Sometimes they're in real hysteria, right? There's a way that airports can get to your emotions that other experiences cannot. And I also get to see a lot of people in different generations together. Airports, an airport was where I realized getting on a plane that Uggs were really happening, right? And I look at things as a bell curve, right? Are we inching up the curve? Are we on the curve? Or is it heading down? It's the first place where I saw that Toms were really a thing, right? Everybody has Toms on. Okay, this is a thing. My latest airport trend, I'm a big fan of away luggage. I'm seeing more and more away roller bags, right? And so I'm always looking to see, what are people just doing when they're not trying to? Because none of us are really, trying at the airport, right? We're not, trying to be cool. We're not showing up in our best. We're just I got to get from here to here. Where are they eating? What are they looking at? What are they talking about? What are the pain points? One of the biggest things as marketers that we should be trying to solve for is someone's pain point. What's the actual problem that needs a solution? If you think about the founding story of Warby Parker, I left my $700 glasses in a plane, and I didn't think I should pay $700 to have to replace them. And so, airports, if you ever have a moment, when my students come to me with the companies they're going to create in our program, I always say, go find a place to sit and just watch people. It's fascinating to watch people, not constantly be in your mind thinking, I should do this, I should do that. Just sit down, have coffee, and see what people do, when they're just in there. Are their suitcases not working? Are things not seeming to flow? Like, what's the actual problem? And I'm sure if you take a minute to write, you'll find many problems that people need to fix. Consumers don't always know what they want. Here's one thing I'm sure of. Consumers always know how they want to feel, right? We all deeply know how we want to feel. Everything we put on, we do it because it makes us feel a certain way. It can make us feel smart. It can make us feel taken care of. It can make us feel comfortable. It can make us feel cool, but there is definitely a feeling assigned to it. We don't always know the product that fits that. And to me, one of the best examples of it has always been an iPad. Nobody knew they wanted an iPad until they had an iPad, right? And now it's like, I don't know what life would be like without my iPad. But until someone actually got up and said, I'm going to create this device for you, no one knew that they wanted. But all the feelings of feeling inspired and connected and entertained, I knew I wanted those feelings, right? I just didn't know it had to be in that device. And sometimes as creators, especially as business owners, you're going to have to take a leap and say, I think people are going to want this product, but always base it on because they want to feel a certain way, right? And really focus and hone in on the feelings. Media channels don't die, they evolve. One of the things I've said many times already that I hate to hear is this is dead, that is dead, this is over, this is done. One of the greatest examples for me, so we think about podcasts now, right? Podcasts are so revolutionary, right? Or is it just like 60 years ago when people would, or maybe longer, sit in their living rooms and turn on the radio and listen to the program of the evening, right? This isn't new. We think about soap opera. Soap opera is literally the invention of Procter & Gamble, who created, basically these long programs that were sponsored by soap. If you look at the end of soap operas today, they're still produced by P&G Studios, So things just evolve. We just do different things. And so it's always about the way that you connect to consumers. And I look at all of these as tools and channels to just really connect. And at the end of the day, marketing is about a connection. It's about a feeling that makes you feel something you want to feel and then predicts a behavior that you're going to do. Innovator, you'll be replaced. We have a lot of brands right now that are in a place of really desperately needing to innovate. And I think one of the toughest things, sometimes I liken it to steering the Titanic, right? Is that you see the writing on the wall for some of these businesses, right? But it's so big and it takes so long for the crash to finally happen. And then there are people who really become, first of all, what I said earlier, all of these people who have all of these complex problems and working together, and then have to figure out what happens with the business. And what you start to find is maybe they buy up smaller companies to bring the innovation, right? You see Walmart did that with Jet.com, right? It's like come in and help innovate. But a lot of times, companies don't quite know what to do. And one of the biggest issues, if you're a marketer today, is, I remember in the 90s when Gap would put their fall campaign on TV and everybody would run to Gap and we'd buy all the clothes, right? Then you fast forward 10 years, Gap changes the logo. People are like, that is ugly, and they change it back. That would never happen before, right? Marketing used to be like a megaphone. We tell you to go do this, and now consumers have a really big voice in what happens. They're telling us 24/7 what they like or don't like. And I would say when I was a teenager, if I wanted to know if Jane Cosmetics tested on animals, I would call an 800 number and ask them. My youngest brother can go online, Google the information. If he doesn't like what he reads, he can start a petition on change.org. He can go on all of his channels, recruit his friends, make a video, and start a movement, right? So the amount of control and power consumers have is just unbelievably changed the way businesses have to deal with them. And so this idea of innovation and how quickly it needs to happen is definitely one of the biggest challenges today. So another thing about great marketing, it always involves surprise and delight. Those are two most important words for marketers, surprise, delight. There are other words too that talk about ways we get people's attention. Shock and awe is another one. I'm sure we're all familiar with a very brilliant marketer who does a great job of shocking us every day. And it doesn't always have to be great, right? It still elicits an emotion. And people align with that emotion, right? And whether we realize it or not, it's like, I wish I could say what I thought every day, right? How many of us deeply feel like we don't get to tell people how we feel every day, right? So sometimes the feeling of watching someone just say, I think you're stupid, you're like, I can't believe I aligned with like that feeling, right? I don't know where that's coming from, that I wish I could tell somebody that too. It could be my boss, could be whoever. I wish I could just say, you're really lazy, you know? But with great marketing, you know, that's why people love Apple. There's just something surprising and exciting. You know, I always say to my team, they know there's something for me that's just so deeply exciting when I see a new piece of creative or a new website or something that feels like magic, right? There's a bit of what you do, and many of you do as developers, I think is just pure magic, when it's like there's an idea in my head that now's on the screen and people can connect in a different way. And great marketers know there always has to be surprise and delight and some unexpected element that feels a bit magical. And finally, you must always have intrinsic and extrinsic value. I think one of the greatest examples of this is Weight Watchers. You know, just getting the app, it's like I did something for myself. Whether you track your points or not, it's just this internal feeling that says, I feel good because I made this decision to buy this product. People do it every day with the decisions, you know, and great marketers understand that both have to be there. There are things we buy, whether it's Pine Salt, whatever. It's like, I'm buying it, but then like Meyer comes along, right? Or Method, and it makes you feel good about the environment buying cleaning products, right? And so there are people who get fundamentally that having both of these elements is really important. And so you think about your marketing, you think about what you offer, really think about, is there intrinsic and extrinsic value? You know, is there something people will feel internally, and is there an external exchange that people will also enjoy? And that's it. I don't know how much time I have left. 11:30.
All right, folks, we definitely have some time for questions so that the live stream folks can hear what you're saying. Please use one of the two microphones in the aisles or raise your hand and I can bring the mic to you if you'd like me to. Just a quick reminder that comments are great for Twitter, not so much for right now. We're looking for questions. Thanks.
Hi, my name's Jason. I run operations for a web agency in San Antonio. I had a battle in my household growing up. I was an Apple guy. My dad's worked for Dell for 20 years. I come home with an iPod and he'd tell me, you know, Dell has that too. And I always had some unspoken reason that I would always go for one brand over another. And then I just discovered Simon Sinek, and he talks about the why. And I felt like that was the unspoken value. Where does the why come into your advice for a company? How does that, I mean, we can talk about price and product and location and all that, but how do you insert the why? Where in the process does that come?
So I think that is a founding part of what you do, right? Is that I think it's like the Jungian philosophy where you figure out there are 12 different personality types. And in our agency, we took on the personality of being the sage, right? So first is, it goes back to the feeling. How do you want your clients to feel? There's some people that want their clients to feel taken care of. There's some people who want their clients to feel like they've come to the sage for advice to solve it. There's some people who want their clients to feel inspired. I would take a moment to really say, like, what's the intention? What's the intended outcome? You know, and for us, it's always the feeling of, we want our clients to feel like they are bringing their toughest problem to a place that will absolutely solve it, and do it in a way that's confidential and that really just produces what they're looking for. And so I think a lot of times when there are those issues, we're unsure of what the ethos is. And I think the problem with agencies, and you know, we're an agency, is sometimes you take the work that's coming and you allow so many outside influences to actually tell you who you are, right? So at a time where I would say, I love looking at emerging demographics, we got shoved in the millennial space. You know, while we do influencer, we're not an influencer agency. We happen to create an influencer, you know, huge project for Oprah Winfrey Network, and then we really became the influencer people, where it's like, really, we're this type of an agency. And so I think agencies often have the issue of your clients dictating who you become, rather than very clearly up front saying, this is who we are and this is the type of business we want to attract.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm Phil. I run IamNewsWatch.com, a publication for online marketers, telling them new trends and things going on in the technical realm and regulatory realm, as well as marketing realm. I'm interested in your perspective on what online marketers will be facing in the future that I need to reflect in my publication.
Oh, it's my favorite thing to talk about right now. Here's the biggest issue, well, I would say challenge in the future, is the number of niche channels that marketers have to pay attention to. For so long, we've been able to just put something on TV, right? Just run a commercial on the Super Bowl, just do this one big thing that has a huge impact. And I think in the future, we won't have that. You know, we're gonna have hundreds of places that we need to be, you know, and I often use the example that before a teenager gets to school, they've seen 350 brand messages. Why would we ever want to do one thing, right? And so I think that the specificity and the number of people it will take for big companies to reach the 60, 70 million, 80 million people they used to do with one big thing can't happen anymore. And so I think they have to fundamentally shift how they're marketing. The other thing I would say is it used to be that celebrities were really big influencers, right? And so now there's a trend we're calling nano influencers. It was micro influencers. And, you know, I started my career with the belief that, you know, and it's a statistic that 81% of us make purchasing decisions based on what our friends say. You know, the idea of who a friend is has just changed. And so, again, when you look at the power and the place of influence, it really democratizes it. And so I think the challenge moving forward is actually for the bigger companies, because now they are forced to play in the same space as smaller, more startup companies, which I don't think we've seen before.
Okay, thank you. A lot of us build websites for clients. They have a value. Somebody's paying us, but how do we get to that next step where their extrinsic feeling about your website, how do you differentiate that? Because a lot of us have the same product, but what makes that special? Is it building community around, you had a website built by us, or is it, what is that? How do you do that for something that's a commodity, essentially?
So the most, I always tell my team, we can always make more money, we can never make more time, right? And so your biggest currency is the time it takes, right? And how quickly can a client get from concept to execution? You know, what's your process like? What makes you different than working with someone else? Do clients want to work collaboratively, or do they want you to just do it? That really has to be defined up front, and that's what starts to differentiate. It's really for how many thousands of agencies exist, right? And it comes down to how do you communicate to your client what the value is? You know, it's not as simple as we make a website. Like you said, many people do that. It's the process. What's your process? Like we at Buzz have a process we call Connect, Brand, Impact, Understand. And as an agency, we always start with research and we end with research. That's our point of differentiation. So I often say to clients, if you are looking for the most creative shop in town, we are not it. That is not our strength. Our strength is in understanding upfront who the target customer is, how we need to really brand this, how we need to impact them, and then how we need to understand the whole process so we can do it again. And so, you know, you have to really develop that elevator pitch, you know, that few sentences that says this is who we're about, and the client needs to get it. But a lot of it is just a workflow and communication too, and how you work with your clients. And I find, you know, all of our business really comes from other clients referring us, you know, and so it's really, again, sitting and saying, well, what's our process, and being really clear on your own website, but this is how we work. And then we have something called the Buzz Report that comes out once a month. It's our trend newsletter. We've always put it out for free. And once a month, we're just in front of, you know, thousands of companies to say, here's something we're giving you for free, and it keeps us top of mind. So you should think about, you know, what's your version of that? That's just advice that you give that helps to educate people.
Thank you.
Hi, Tina. I'm with an e-commerce store in the building materials industry, and we have a fairly complicated product. We're a youthful brand. Can you think of any examples in the history of your business where you found a complex product that presented really well?
A complex, yes, we have several complex problems. Products rather. Here's what I always try to say to my clients though. Can you say it in 5 words or less? Even if it's really complicated. How do you drill it down to those 5 words? Sometimes it's an exercise for the internal team to get on the same page, because even very complex things in my mind can be drilled down to 5 words. You know, and then because the problem you then have if you can't do that is you both must educate the market on who you are and what you do. So you're playing the role of educator, and you're now playing the role of salesman. And you really just, you know, I always say, you want to be a new lane in the highway, you never want to have to build the highway. That is the hardest job to do, because how many times now do people say, we're the Uber of this, we're the we're the Warby of this, right? Because someone's already kind of blazed the trail, and so it is much easier to do the sales part when you don't have to do the educating part too.
Great, thank you.
Hi, yes. I think I've got kind of a basic question, but you mentioned earned media versus paid, or all of those things. I do all the marketing for a small women-run business, and as a small business, I totally see all the channels that I could be working, and so that's what I've been doing nonstop for 2 years. Last year, we had earned media with Fox Business, and this year, our big thing was we bought an ad in the Magnolia Journal, and the two behaved so differently, and so differently that I've been a little perplexed and a little discouraged. And so I wonder, just like to a small business, where are the best channels that you encourage small businesses to really put all of their effort, and what are some ways that are like some tips for that you can get more earned media, which might be a really like not a simple question.
So was it that Magnolia didn't perform the way you thought it was going to?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would anticipate that. So I think it's really important. So are you a direct-to-consumer? Are you selling to consumers?
Yes.
Okay.
E-commerce.
So if you're an e-com business, the most important thing is to look at customer segmentation. It's a big part of what we do, right? So are we talking to healthy moms? Are we talking to athletic dads? I once had a client that told me they were going to make Mentrist a thing. It was like Pinterest for men, and I was like, that's never going to be a thing. Like, you should never do that. Like that, the behavior is not even there. Do not waste your effort, right? And there are times where we get really excited about a channel like Magnolia, right? Magnolia is a great place for them to market their own stuff, right? And it's a Martha Stewart model, right? It's like, I sell all of these products, and I'm going to tell you, and who are the people that buy ads? People who are selling all of those products, right? So what you really wanted was to be in Joanna's Things, right? Her top 10 things of the month. And it's just and that leads to the surprise and delight for the customers. So think about the businesses that you're competing against in that space wouldn't have made sense versus being on TV or a place where people hear your brand, they see you, they can immediately connect with you. So you have to think about, number one, just 3 different types of customers you're serving, and then I would name them, right? So with many of my customers, we're like, she's Molly. Molly is 41. She's, we had a client who was spending tons of money on radio and wanted to get out of radio, and we realized, like, your customer is actually a soccer mom who spends 4.5 hours a day in her car. So the best place for you to be advertising is actually on radio. So you have to get a little, kind of drill down on the activity of the person and then let that inform the channels. Don't think just because a channel is awesome, it's going to be awesome for you. And then once you realize, what channels work, you'll be able to double down on that a bit more.
Awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome.
First, thank you, Tina. One of the things, and I guess as a professional web developer and as a digital brand strategist, I'm running into the clients who they know what their demographics, they know who their audience is, and they kind of know what they want branded, but then we'll kind of do some research and say, maybe you should kind of cater toward this way, and they're like, I still want to do it this way. So how do you kind of deal with those? Do you decide, okay, client wins, they're paying me, I'm going to just do it their way? Or do you find a middle road, or do you just say, I'm not doing it, period, I don't care what you say?
I try to find the middle ground and always say, we're going to do 50% of what you've done before, and we're going to experiment with 50%. Because the problem is, if you work with any big company, you're looking at last year's budget, right? This is what happened last year, and we only think we're going to have this kind of variance. And so people have gotten very comfortable with what they know. What we know as practitioners is that every single day something is changing. The business you were in a year ago is not the business you're in now. But what happens at these companies, right? We go back to that initial funnel. All of this internal drama is going on, right? And it's like, we just got to stick to what we know. And so then when you as the agency don't perform, it's like, well, it's your fault. You didn't know. And clearly the research maybe that this plan is built on is a year old at this point, once it's gone through all the meetings and all the approvals of all the people that say yes to this plan. And so I think you'll find that that's going to shift. And I say it's going to shift because it has to, when it becomes a revenue problem, right? When the ability to not be quicker or be at the speed of the market changes the business, that's when the business will fundamentally make a change. And so I would challenge you to say, okay, can we do it 50% your way, 50% ours? Not, can we do it 75% your way, 25% ours, and let's see who performs better, and then we'll iterate from there.
Thank you.
This will be our last question.
So my name's Jonathan. I have an agency just down the road here in the Nashville area that employs one person, and that's me. And I imagine there's a lot of people in the room that are that way. So you've given some awesome tips about how we can create better messages. And that's good for me because I'm my own marketing team. But one question I have is more along the lines of the best way to get the message out there, because I can't afford a Super Bowl commercial. I can't even really afford a radio spot. So I've done a lot of Facebook ads. I'm looking into doing more with Google ads and stuff like that. But I'm curious if you have any other ideas for an affordable means of marketing. I get pretty much all my clients through referrals, and I'm looking to try to grow beyond that because referrals are awesome, but I want to do more than just the network of the people I've worked with. So what tips would you have in that area?
Sure. So when I started out, I did a lot of writing. I actually have a degree in journalism, not in marketing, and so I wrote quite a bit. Lots of opinions, and for very random places like Retail Merchandiser magazine. And so I would say to all of you in that space, first of all, like, thought leadership is really important. And that means you have to take a moment to actually say, what do I believe? What do I fundamentally believe is true about the work I'm doing, the industry I'm in, and how do you become that person? So it means being on LinkedIn and be consistent. If you can't write something once a week, don't be sporadic and, like, for a while write once a week and then you don't show up for months, right? If all you can commit to is once a month, you're gonna have a really great piece of content, do that. Once a month, have a really good piece of content. Know exactly who your audience is. And so make sure you're curating those spaces. You know, it can be on LinkedIn where, you know, I have friends who are massive LinkedIn influencers. I have a friend who does a show from his iPhone for a minute. It's like 1 minute with him talking about a marketing thing. And so I would figure out what the thing is that you're known for. If you don't know, I would go back to your last 5 clients and say, why did you hire me? What was it that differentiated me? And then take that and try to make it a platform. And then engage on the medium that makes the most sense for you. So if you are an Instagram, if you are not good with Instagram, if you don't take great, compelling photos, don't go on Instagram. Like, just don't do that. It doesn't help you. And then your clients are going to be like, I don't want that. You know, most of all, I have clients that come to me that say, I want my newsletter to look like your newsletter. You know, I want you to give me something that looks at that. So I would think about, what are you best at? Do that. If you have a great voice, be on podcasts, you know, create a podcast, and don't try to do too many things. I would master one thing, let that start to create a return for you, and then move on to the next thing.
Give her one more round of applause, folks. Lunch, the best part of the day, right? So reminder that if you want your t-shirt or swag, you need to pick it up by 3 o'clock at the back of the hallway track. By 3 o'clock, do not leave your swag behind. It's really cool. Also, if you're interested in getting your official WordPress gear, the WordPress gear store will be closing by 4 o'clock. Get there early and purchase your official WordPress items, including that adorable stuffed Wapoo. Don't go home without one of those. Also, we have a cell phone at Lost and Found. If you are missing your cell phone, please come to the Lost and Found and see if the one we have is yours. We would very much like to send it home with its owner. All right, folks, I'm going to go ahead and start rolling into the talks. Reminder, this is the lightning round. If we have time to take a couple questions, we will. If we do not, there is always Twitter. And I'm sure the speakers would be more than happy to chat with you after the talks. So Chris Teitzel is a security and privacy nerd who started out in Drupal and has converted to the side of WordPress. He is here with us today to share with us what he has learned. Everybody, Chris Teitzel.
Thank you. So I'm newer to the community. I've been around WordPress for about 2 years now. So a lot of you don't know who I am, so I wanted to include an introduction slide. I'm the dad to 2 nerds in training. These are actually the 4th generation tech nerds in our family. It goes all the way back to my grandpa who worked at IBM from the 50s on. My dad worked at IBM. He's on his 37th year there. I thought I could do something different with my life, and here I am. So I've been in open source for almost a decade. I got started in Drupal, and yes, we're going to be talking a lot about Drupal and WordPress today. But I got started in Drupal, and I'll go into why in a bit. But then transferred over to WordPress as I started creating our product. I'm the founder and CEO of Locker. And I'm getting more and more involved in privacy policy and also governance issues. If you were here earlier this morning, you heard me talk about that a little bit as well. So this is an old picture, but I really like it because it defines what a lot of us do on the web. This was the browser wars, right? And so you had Chrome and Firefox, and they're like battling it out. And then you have Internet Explorer over there eating paste in the corner, wondering why nobody likes them. I think that a lot of the times when we talk about Drupal and WordPress, we end up having this type of mentality. It's Drupal and WordPress battling it out. I'm not going to say who's eating the paste in the corner. I'll let you fill that gap in yourself. But a lot of the times when I go to a WordPress event and I say I do Drupal, the first thing I get is, what's it like over there? Or what is it over there? Or what do you guys do? And then I go back to Drupal. I was like, oh, I was just at WordCamp. And they're like, what's WordCamp like? It's the exact same reaction. And I feel like I'm a double agent or something going back and forth. But a lot of the times I also get the question of which one's better, right? Who's the best? And there is no better. There is no best. And this is a comic that we like to circulate in the Drupal community. I don't know if you can see it too well in the back, but it's the learning curves of the popular CMSs, and this has been around for a while. And so down at the bottom you have ModX, which is just kind of this straight line. You got WordPress and Joomla, which start out low and then kind of come up, and then you got Drupal, which is this hanging cliff with bodies hanging off of it and crucifixes and a bulldozer pushing bodies off the top of it. And you look at this, I look at this from a Drupal perspective, and we kind of take this as a badge of honor of like, yeah, I survived the crucifixes and the bulldozer, and I'm on my way now. Like I'm a elite dev now, right? And then you look at it from a WordPress perspective or an outside the Drupal perspective, and you're like, why would I ever go to Drupal if that's what it looks like? Funny enough, this was written drawn during the Drupal 6, Drupal 7 era. Drupal 8, I would add a couple more crucifixes up there and maybe like a bulldozer or a giant dump truck dumping bodies off the end. We've gotten a lot more complex. And so I'm going to have some real talk today. If you know me, and you'll hopefully get to know me better, that's what I do. I don't hold my words too often. And both platforms do things really, really well. And they have their strengths, and we need to be able to look at those. And also, we do things less than ideal. And fortunately, I've been in both and have had the experience of both, so I can see kind of both sides of the coin for each of them. And what we need to do is we need to play to our strengths. I got involved in Drupal because I was starting an app in 2009, as everybody was. And I said, I need to go build a website for this app. And until that point, I had coded my own websites and done a little bit of HTML and dabbled here and there. And so I went on Theme Monster. And I apologize if anyone is here from Theme Monster or watching the stream. I love your product. But I went on Theme Monster. I bought a theme that I liked, and it happened to use this thing called Drupal. So I just happened to fall into Drupal. Probably one of the worst decisions I made at the time, because as a brand new developer to the CMS world, you pick the hardest thing out there and you didn't understand it. I installed it. Sure enough, nothing looked like I wanted it to. So then I said, and this is kind of my mentality in life, I just got to do it myself. And so I went and built my own theme in Drupal and slogged through that and started getting involved there. And that's basically how I got into Drupal. I didn't pick it because I thought it was better. I didn't pick it because of anything. I literally picked it because Theme Monster had a cool design for it. But as I started getting into WordPress recently, within the last couple of years, I started seeing more and more of what it does. And I realized that the strengths that I thought that Drupal had were good, but they were limited. And I had always heard, WordPress it's insecure. It's not. It's really secure. It's too easy. It's not. It's actually pretty complex. But I heard all these things from the Drupal community. I started getting into WordPress, and I realized, this isn't actually that bad. And if we play to our strengths, WordPress has a large focus on design and usability. That's first and foremost. Democratizing publishing, right? The idea that anybody can pick up WordPress, install it, and start running. The themes out of the box are gorgeous. They're useful. They work. A lot of websites just use that theme and nothing else, right? In Drupal, this year we just launched the out-of-the-box initiative, which now when you turn on Drupal and you install it with the out-of-the-box initiative, it actually looks like a website. That was a big thing for us in 2018 to finally make Drupal look like a website. Design and usability is at the core of everything you do. You have privacy by design. You have privacy in core. That's huge. Media management. Again, this should seem like table stakes for most of you sitting here going, yeah, I know. But media management, the ability to do embeds and videos and pictures and have libraries and all that type of stuff from Drupal, that again is just starting to get modernized and just starting to mature in our ecosystem in 2018. And so play to your strengths. You have this capability. One of the things that is not often talked about in Drupal and in a lot of the I guess open source world in general is the economy of open source. It's kind of the thing that people don't want to talk about. Is, we all have to make money off of open source, but how do you do it? WordPress has a really, really robust plugin and theme economy. There are graveyards among graveyards of companies in Drupal who thought that they could sell a module or sell a theme. It does not work. The community rejects it vehemently. Whereas in WordPress, you embrace it and you build these plugins, you sell them, and by doing that, the person who's making the plugin gets money and in turn makes a better plugin. It kind of helps that whole ecosystem run. And so I look at this as a strength and something that you and we should all embrace. And then yes, Gutenberg. I know it's a controversial topic right now and a lot of people have a lot of differing opinions on it, but it is one of those radical changes to how the web will be consumed in the future. And because of that, other projects, including Drupal, are looking at Gutenberg saying, how can we do that? And so you're setting the path, you're building the infrastructure that a lot of the web is going to work on. And Drupal is looking at that and we're saying, wow, that's pretty good. And again, it goes back to design and usability and everything that WordPress has for its strengths. And then for those that are looking to work with Drupal, here's some of the things that I would say. So going back, this is all items that when I talk to people in the Drupal community, I'm like, we need to do this because we still haven't figured this piece out. Now I'm going to tell you kind of what Drupal does and, hopefully nudge you along the way to thinking about maybe this is something that we could do in WordPress. And the number one thing is data architecture. When people ask me, like, what's the difference between WordPress and Drupal? It's data architecture. Drupal is a really good content modeling system that happens to make websites, in my opinion. It has a really strong data architecture, and because of that, you can create these really complex contents and entities and put them all together and then break them all into pieces and put them all back together in a different format in a different place. And that data architecture lends it to be used in a lot of interesting scenarios in powering apps through headless and all the various things that it can do there. Core APIs. As I was building a WordPress plugin for our service, I had realized that I came to rely on the core APIs that Drupal had, and I took them for granted. I didn't realize how good they really were. One of them for me is a form API. In Drupal, you have a form API where you can declare a form, create an array of all the different types of inputs that you want. You send it to Drupal, and out pops a form. You don't have to write any HTML. You don't have to write anything. Everything's already built for you. And oh, by the way, by creating that form, you also get a validation handler and a submit handler that are automatically called back to you. To create that ecosystem in WordPress is not very simple unless you start using some of the plugins. And so what I'm talking about here is if Core can adapt some of these frameworks, the plugin, it's not that we're trying to, or in my opinion, that portions of the plugin economy need to be replaced. I think it would actually strengthen some of the plugin economy and themes to have some of these core APIs and some of these core functionalities. Another one is views, and if you're not familiar with Drupal, views is our database querying UI, and it allows you to build these complex pages. Again, from the complex data structure, I can say, I want a page of all the news articles with this image, the field that is the subtitle and the date and the author, and I want just that. And it will create a page of just that. And every time I add a new article, that page is updated. I don't have to worry about it. That's in Core, and it's super powerful. It's also what runs our Core REST API. And so you can declare, here are all the fields that I want the REST API to have, and publish it, and then anytime somebody hits that URL, they get a beautiful little JSON to go run a headless app or a mobile app or anything else they want. And again, REST API is now baked into Core. It's if you talk to people about what the future of Drupal is, that's what it is. It's going to be a headless system. So we need to play to our strengths. We need to be able to look at and figure out what are we doing well and how can we learn from each other, because a lot of our learning comes from inside the community right now. Drupal likes to stay on its own little island. WordPress likes to stay on its own little island. And I think there's a lot that we can kind of cross-pollinate and learn from each other. So let's find ways to share ideas, code, and make all of our projects better. I'm a big fan of open libraries that can be shared in between. And so with that, unfortunately, we don't have any time for questions, but I will be at the Happiness Bar later. I'll be grabbing lunch and walking around. So please come find me, and I'll tell you all about Drupal and what we really do over there. Thank you.
All right, while we're doing our transition here, I'm going to go ahead and call up our next speaker. Drew Gorton began working on the web in 1996, and he now works as the Director of Developer Relations at Pantheon. He's been all over the world. His passport is full of stamps, and he's here to talk about traveling the open source world.
Awesome, thank you. So just by show of hands, how many of us enjoy traveling? So if you could raise your hands. That is a lot of hands. Awesome. I think a lot of us like travel for very different reasons, and I'd like to just talk and let's pull some of those out. So on the count of three, I would like everyone to just say one of the reasons that you like travel. So we're going to do this. So you got a moment to think. 1, 2, 3. Just blurt out the thing. So ready? 1, 2, 3. Okay, I didn't catch all of it. But I think travel and the things that we love about travel, you can get by traveling to other open source communities. So when I was growing up, I grew up in a small town in the Midwest of the United States. And it was the kind of place that on school picture day, you would probably dress your kid in his nicest clothes and make sure he had a really crisp bowl cut. So if you can imagine that kind of place, that's where I grew up. When I was growing up, we had a meal that we did that we called fish and rice. And it looked something like this. And so if you said I was having fish and rice tonight, I knew it was going to be something like this. It probably didn't have the sliced lime. That's a little bit fancier than we ever did, but something like this. And then later in life, I had a pretty awesome opportunity. I had the chance to move to Spain, and I studied in Spain in the University of Seville for about a year. And that was a really amazing learning experience for me. I made friends with all these wonderful people who were seeing the world in a really different way. And I realized that I saw the world in a really different way than they did. The events that we celebrated and how we celebrated them, the stories we told, the heroes, the villains, all of these things were different. And it was a powerful realization that that was a way that we could all learn from each other. And it was awesome. And I think one of the things that's really manifested that you can see this in really directly is in the food that we eat. Right? So I went to Spain with an idea of fish and rice. And then I discovered this. This is paella. It's a really awesome combination of fish and rice and some other good yummy stuff. And then later in life even, I had the chance to go to Japan, and I taught English in Japan for a number of years. And it was pretty cool. And again, I learned so much about myself and the world and what it means to be human. And also, another combination of fish and rice. As a kid, that elementary school kid, I probably would have been horrified to think that someday I would like this combination of fish and rice and think that that was pretty good. But it definitely happened. So I first started coming to WordPress events probably about 3 or 4 years ago. And just like Chris mentioned, that's kind of a big thing because I came from a different community, also happened to be Drupal. And I quickly realized, though, that a lot of the things that I learned from those travel experiences, from the life experiences, really served me well in understanding and being able to relate and make new friends and things like that. So WordPress is a very special kind of ecosystem, right? There's both people and technologies. But the technologies is an open source ecosystem, right? And that's a very special kind of technology. That's different than the software that most of us get on our phones, et cetera, where we agree to a thing that says we don't own it and the long list of requirements and yes, all my data is going to you. Open source software comes with a very different outlook. And the agreement that we accept when we use WordPress is much more about the freedom. So yes, there's freedom as in money, but there's also freedom in the ability to inspect it, alter it, add to it, redistribute it, other things like that. And this is sometimes called the freedom is in liberty, or that sense of the word freedom. But one of the things that's common to open source technologies is that they need people to survive and thrive, right? They need people doing webinars and podcasts and books and events and meetups and all of those kinds of things. And another interesting thing about WordPress is that it itself is made of open source technologies. So PHP is the language that we have that we use to create the database and do the logic and log in and all that stuff. Then we store stuff in databases, MySQL or Maria. These are also open source technologies. And usually, we run most of our sites on something called Linux, which is an open source operating system, not Windows, not Mac. Most WordPress websites run using Linux. And most of them display their pages to the world with Apache or Nginx. And this is the so-called LAMP stack. These, if you will, are the ingredients of WordPress, the open source ingredients that WordPress uses. But a really interesting thing is out there in the world, and that is there are a gazillion other tools and technologies that combine those same ingredients in very different ways. And so Wikipedia tracks 57 different projects that all use these same ingredients, PHP, Maria, Apache, etc., to do some really interesting different things. And I just chose a few logos here. Not all of them are content management systems. Some of them, CVCRM happens to be about tracking people and such, and CRMs. But all of them use these ingredients in slightly different ways. But they all have their own communities and events and podcasts and things. So if you look at one example, Drupal, in the next 3 months, there are a whole bunch of different things. And some of these actually might be near you. And they might be an interesting way, as Chris was saying, to check out the way we do fish and rice differently. So if you live in New Jersey or London or New England or Chicago, there's something happening in the next 3 months that might be of interest. Might be easy, a quick trip, a short bit of travel. Or instead of looking sort of crossways to something like Drupal or ModX or other things like that, you can go deeper into one of the ingredients that we share. And look at PHP. If you look at PHP events, right now, actually, we could leave this talk, grab lunch maybe, hop on a plane, go to Paris for SymphonyCon. That sounds pretty good. Or Sunshine PHP. I think that might be in Hawaii. Seems like a good reason to go. But if you're into PHP or JavaScript or any of the other technologies that we share, there are conferences and events and podcasts and webinars and other things and places to learn more about the underlying tools. Or you can step back. There are a ton of events that are sort of generalist events that have some sort of explicit or just sort of thematic inclusion of open source. And again, if you just look at the next 3 months, there's a whole bunch of them. Amsterdam, Oman. There's another one in Hawaii. Maybe just like go and stay. Seems like it's very work related. My advice though is that if you do, go gracefully. And so these are the things that I've felt have served me both in travel as well as in visiting another open source community. Start by listening, and then go with the idea that you are learning, not converting. I think probably very few of us like the experience of someone coming to our house and telling us that we've got life not figured out and we're all wrong and we should do it differently. Just like in the real world, guides can be a great help. So there are people in this room, I'm positive of it, who have gone to some of those different events or have some connection to some of those different technologies. If you know them, you can ask them for advice. How would I get into PHP? How would I, where should I start with JavaScript? Maybe they'll even go to a meetup with you. That's pretty cool. But if you do that, especially if you do that, make sure that you get out of your little group. Like probably for those of us who raised our hands and said, yes, we like travel, we've all seen the groups of people walking with the umbrella, following in a clump, talking about something, and then moving on and staying with that. Don't do that. You know, the umbrella people are wonderful. They're handy. It's helpful. But also go out and make some connections. And that can be super daunting. It's hard to meet people. But it's also pretty awesome, and it opens you up to lots of possibilities in the future. And the last thing I would say is share your journey. Every time we make connections between open source projects, we build lines of communication, we build possibilities for the future. And I think if more of us do this and share what we learn and help others do it as well, the stronger our communication will be across these projects, and the better we're going to make the open web. So, thank you. My name is Drew Gorton. I'm the Director of Developer Relations for Pantheon. And if you want these slides, they're at Twitter. I'll be posting them on my Twitter link. That's what I wanted to share.
We have time for 1 or 2 quick questions if anybody has any. Or we could just go get food. Any questions, folks? Nobody wants to get between anybody and food. All right. Cool. Let's go get lunch early then. Thank you again, folks.